Prologue. Echoes of fire and steel, the dreaming woods of Trace, stirred beneath a waning moon, their gnarled branches whispering secrets to the cold wind that swept down from the Anuli Mountains. These woods were ancient beyond reckoning, older than the reign of the Phoenix Kings, older even than the time when the elves first walked the shores of Ulthuan. Here, the trees 999 not merely live, they remembered. Their roots burrowed deep into the bones of the world, tangled around echoes of battles long faded, lullabies of forgotten gods, and the last cries of heroes lost to time. Mist hung low across the forest floor, curling like breath around the trunks of the silverwood trees. Here and there, phosphorescent motes floated lazily through the air, glimmering shards of ambient magic that gave the forest its name. Some claimed these lights were the dreams of Isha herself, scattered like petals upon the wind. Others, less poetic, knew them as the residue of centuries of spilled blood and broken spells. In a secluded glade near the heart of the forest, the mist thickened into a swirling veil. It was a place no path led to, no map marked. Only those the woods deemed worthy or doomed could find it. Tonight, the glade had called one such soul. Seeress Lariel stood at the edge of an ancient stone circle, her violet eyes closed, her slender fingers raised to the stars in supplication. Her white robe shimmered faintly with runes of warding and wisdom, while her long silver hair drifted behind her, caught in an unfelt breeze. She chanted softly in Eltherin, invoking the grace of the goddess Liliath, weaving visions from the threads of fate. The glade pulsed in time with her voice, the ground humming with restrained power. Beneath her bare feet, the moss turned slick with dew. The air thickened, folded inward, and the dreaming began. With a cry that was part awe, part agony, Lariel's mind was torn from her body and hurled through the skeins of time. She soared through aeons, through veils of smoke and blood, through the golden fires of creation and the screaming darkness of oblivion. She saw the birth of stars and the dying of empires. She saw Ulthuan as it once was, whole, proud, resplendent. She saw the Shining Ones walk among the elves, their eyes like molten suns, their laughter thunder in the skies. And then she saw him, Aenarion, the first, the Firewalker, the Doombringer. He stood upon a battlefield wreathed in black flame, his silver armor slick with gore. His eyes blazed like twin stars. In his hand, the sword of Cain screamed, its blade a jagged sliver of night. Around him, demons fell like wheat before the scythe, their howls swallowed by the roar of war. But it was not this that made Lariel weep. It was his face. Beneath the fury, beneath the divine power that surged through him like wildfire, there was sorrow, bone-deep sorrow. A man sundered by fate, cursed by his choices, loved by gods and reviled by destiny. She reached out to him, but the vision shattered. Darkness rushed in, and from that darkness, a new figure emerged. A young warrior, cloaked in shadows, fire dancing at his fingertips. His features were not yet fully formed, blurred by the haze of unborn time, but his eyes were the same. The same pain, the same fire, the same soul. Aenarion, reborn. "No," Lariel gasped, her voice echoing within the dream. "It cannot be." But the woods whispered back, "It is done." A flash of steel, a scream of gods, and then she saw the sword of Cain resting once more upon its obsidian altar upon the blighted isle. Its dark surface pulsed like a heart, and in its cold reflection she saw the future bleed. Ultu in flames, cities drowned by the sea, the Ever-Queen dead, Tyrion fallen, and above it all, a lone figure, his armor blackened by ash, his face a mask of grief and wrath, raising the sword of Cain to the skies once more. Lariel awoke, screaming. The glade was silent now. The mist had fled. The lights had vanished. The stars above no longer shimmered with promise. They watched in silence, distant and cold. She stumbled from the circle, her heart pounding like war drums in her chest. Blood trickled from her nose. The runes on her robe dimmed, burnt out by the force of the vision. Her hands trembled. Aenarion had returned, and with him, the world would either be saved or sundered forever. Chapter 1. The flame rekindled. The mountains of Caelir stood proud and solemn beneath the silver dawn, their peaks veiled by slow-drifting clouds. Here the air was sharp and clean, scented with pine and frost. The land was wild and unforgiving, where bears the size of chariots stalked the ridges, and where even elves learned to tread with reverence. Caelir was the realm of hunters and wardens, those who stood between Ulthuan's heartlands and the monstrous wilderness beyond. Nestled within a hidden valley at the foothills of the Anuli lay the village of Caelir, a place so remote that even the high princes seldom remembered its name. It was a settlement of carved stone and timber, its homes built around a towering shrine dedicated to Isha, the mother of the elves. Smoke rose from slender chimneys, curling into the pale sky as the first light of dawn caught the dew on the rooftops, turning the entire valley into a field of glass and flame. It was here that Caelir lived. He was no prince, no noble son of Ulthuan's glittering courts. He was a hunter's child, raised in the shadow of the forest, taught the ways of bow and blade. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the golden hair typical of his kin and eyes the color of molten amber, he had always seemed slightly apart from those around him. There was a gravity to him, a quiet, simmering intensity that even as a child had made the elders whisper. The dawn had not yet fully broken when Caelir's cry echoed through the still air. He jolted awake, drenched in sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his hands clenched around his blanket as if it were a sword, and his heart thundered with the rhythm of battle. For a moment the world around him shimmered, not the simple wooden walls of his hut, but towers of white marble burning under a crimson sky. He saw warriors in silver armor locked in desperate combat against monstrous shapes that defied reason. Wings of shadow blotting out the sun, dragons soared overhead, their roars shaking the heavens, their scales gleaming with fire. And at the center of it all, himself. Not as Caelir, the woodsman's son, but as something vast and terrible. He stood atop a mountain of corpses, his sword a beacon of flame, his face illuminated by divine fire. In his ears he heard the clang of steel, the weeping of gods, and the whisper of a blade that pulsed like a living thing. Then, as suddenly as it came, the vision broke. Caelir gasped and fell forward, his hands trembling. The air in the hut felt thick, almost burning, and the faint scent of ozone lingered in the air. The small wooden charms that hung from the ceiling, wards carved to protect from evil spirits, swung wildly as if a storm had passed through. Outside, the forest birds had fallen silent. Caelir rose, his breath uneven, and stepped to the basin near his bed. The water shimmered faintly in the candlelight as he leaned closer. For an instant his reflection wasn't his own. It was a man older, with eyes like molten gold, and armor wreathed in ash and flame. He recoiled, stumbling back, water splashing across the floor. A soft voice called from outside, "Caelir?" It was Mariel, his mother. Her tone was warm but weary, the voice of one who had carried sorrow too long. She entered the hut, her silver hair tied loosely behind her, her eyes immediately finding the overturned basin and the wild fear in her son's face. "Another dream," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Caelir nodded, his throat too dry to speak. She crossed to him, placing a gentle hand on his cheek. "You must not fear them, my son. The dreams are only memories. The forest has a long memory, and sometimes it speaks to those who listen too closely. But even as she said it, there was hesitation in her eyes, a flicker of doubt she could not hide. Caelir turned away. "They are not dreams," he whispered. "One can feel them. The fire. It burns in my blood. Every night one see war, one see dragons, a sword that screams in my mind, and one see myself holding it." Meryl's hand tightened on his shoulder. "Do not speak of such things. The sword of Cain is a curse. To even dream of it is dangerous." He looked at her, confusion giving way to anger. "Then why do one see it? Why do one feel it calling to me?" She said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. That day, Caelir left the village before sunrise, as he often did 999, bow slung across his back, a hunting knife at his hip. The forest greeted him in silence. Mist curled through the undergrowth, coiling around the trunks of ancient trees. The deeper he went, the quieter it became, until even the rustle of leaves seemed to fade away. It was there, in the stillness, that he heard it, a low hum, like the sound of a distant forge. He followed it instinctively, moving through the shadows until he came upon a clearing he had never seen before. In its center stood an enormous stone, half buried in moss. Its surface was carved with runes so ancient that even time had forgotten their meaning. The air above it shimmered faintly, like heat rising from desert sand. Caelir approached, his heartbeat quickening. As he reached out, the runes flared with crimson light, and the ground trembled beneath him. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed inside his mind, neither male nor female, but vast, filled with sorrow and fury in equal measure. "You were fire once, and fire you shall be again." Pain lanced through him, and he fell to his knees. Images flooded his vision, legions of elves clad in radiant mail, gods weeping upon crimson altars, and the shadow of a vast blade descending from the heavens. The sword of Cain. It screamed his name. When he awoke, the clearing was silent once more. But something within him had changed. His skin glowed faintly with warmth, and when he looked down, his hands trembled, not with fear, but with power. The air around him quivered, as though the world itself sensed the rebirth of something ancient. That night, the sky above Shres burned with auroras of crimson and gold. The villagers whispered of omens, of spirits, of gods stirring in their sleep. And in the woods beyond Tir Alir, Caelir knelt beside the great stone, his eyes reflecting the flickering light of unseen flames. He 999 not yet understand what he was becoming. So somewhere, across the sea, on the blighted isle, the sword of Cain began to whisper once more. Chapter 2. Visions of Aenarion. The journey to the shrine of Aenarion began beneath a shroud of mist that clung to the valleys of Chrace like a memory of ghosts. The dawn sun struggled to break through, painting the world in pale gold and gray. Wind whispered down from the Anulii peaks, carrying the scent of pine and salt and the faint keening of distant seabirds. Caelir rode at the head of a small procession, a dozen riders in gleaming mail, their helms crested with white horsehair, the sigil of the phoenix embroidered upon their cloaks. These were the envoys of the shrine, sent from the heart of Ulthuan after word had reached them of a young man in Chrace who had walked unburned through sacred fire. It was said that one of the Phoenix Guard, those mute sentinels who never spoke save through the will of their god, had been struck by a vision so violent that he collapsed in the midst of his vigil. When he rose, his voice, a thing not heard in centuries, uttered a single word. Return. That was enough. The keepers of the flame came at once. The road wound like a serpent through mountain passes and glimmering glades. To Caelir's eyes, it was a pilgrimage through a world that seemed to pulse with hidden life. Since that morning in the forest, the world had not looked the same. Colors were sharper, sounds clearer. He could feel the hum of magic beneath the surface of things, like a heartbeat just below hearing. Even the air seemed to part for him when he walked. He tried to bury his fear in silence, but it gnawed at him. The memory of that stone in the clearing haunted him still, the crimson runes, the voice that had spoken from nowhere and everywhere, the way the ground had trembled as though the world itself had drawn breath. The words echoed in his skull even now. You were fire once, and fire you shall be again. The captain of the guard, a broad-shouldered warrior named Ulthuan, rode beside him. His armor gleamed like molten gold, his face stern but not unkind. "You've been chosen," he said quietly, as if to himself. "Few ever see the shrine. Fewer still are summoned by it." Caelir 9999 not reply. The truth was, he didn't feel chosen. He felt cursed. After 2 days' ride, they reached the coast. Before them stretched the Sea of Dreams, a vast expanse of cerulean waves that shimmered as if dusted with powdered gemstones. From a cliffside overlooking the shore, the shrine of Aenarion revealed itself, a wonder beyond mortal craft. It rose from the sea itself, built upon an island of obsidian stone and white marble, its towers shaped like the wings of a great bird. At its center burned the eternal flame, a pillar of golden fire that reached toward the heavens. It was said that this fire had burned since the dawn of the world, kindled by Aenarion's own hand when the first Phoenix King walked into its embrace. Those the god accepted emerged transformed, their souls bound to the divine. Those he 999 not were consumed utterly. Between the shore and the island stretched a narrow bridge of stone, ancient and treacherous. No boat could reach the shrine, for the waters around it were alive with wards and spirits of flame. Only those called by Aenarion himself were permitted to cross. The guards dismounted and bowed low. "We go no further," Ulthuan said. "The path from here is yours alone." Caelir turned toward the bridge, his pulse hammering. The sea below hissed and frothed, and in its depths strange lights flickered, forms of winged beings drifting through the water like living embers. The air grew hot as he took his first step. And then the whispers began. They were faint at first, like wind through reeds, but with every step they grew clearer. Ancient voices speaking in the tongue of the gods, their tones neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel. He could not understand the words, yet their meaning seared itself into his heart. He felt his soul stripped bare, every thought, every flaw, every memory laid open beneath the weight of their gaze. The world blurred, the sea fell away. He walked now through a place of light and shadow, where the sky burned with the colors of creation and time itself seemed to twist like smoke. Beneath his feet stretched not stone but fire, pure living fire, and yet it 999 not burn. Instead it felt warm and alive, like the pulse of blood through a living vein. A shape took form before him. It was not a man, nor a god, but something between. Wings of blinding radiance arched from its shoulders, and its face was hidden behind a mask of flame. The voice that spoke was the echo of eternity itself. "You have walked this path before." Caelir fell to his knees, trembling. One do not understand." The figure extended its hand, and within its palm burned a fragment of the eternal flame. "The soul remembers what the mind forgets. Once you stood before me as a king. Once you drew the blade that would damn your line for all ages." Visions struck him like thunderclaps, images of endless war, of a burning sky, of his own hand drawing a sword from a black altar as gods screamed in despair. He saw himself again, the same eyes, the same soul, but older, wreathed in shadow and glory, standing upon a sea of corpses. Aenarion, the name tore through him like a blade. The god's voice thundered once more. Your fire was not extinguished. It slept. Now the world trembles once again, and so must the flame rise. The figure vanished, the vision shattered. Caelir was standing upon the bridge again, the roar of the sea crashing in his ears. Before him blazed the eternal flame. Without thinking, he stepped forward. The priest cried out, "Stop! None may enter unbidden." But the fire welcomed him. It reached out like a living thing, curling around him in golden tendrils. He felt the heat lick at his skin, felt his heart ignite, felt every vein in his body fill with molten light. The smell of ash filled the air, yet his flesh 999 not burn. Instead, the fire bent around him, flowing like silk, wrapping him in brilliance. He turned his back to the chamber. Greg Duck dropped his arms. His hand, the blackened manuscript, wrapped it in brilliance. The priests fell to their knees, their eyes wide with awe. At the edge of the shrine, the Phoenix Guard, silent as statues for centuries, turned as one. Their eyes, hidden behind their crested helms, flared with inner light. For the first time in an age, they moved. A ripple of power swept through the shrine. Bells tolled from towers that had not rung since the age of legends. The waters around the island churned, and from their depths rose a cry that split the heavens, a sound like the scream of a phoenix reborn. Caelir stood within the heart of the flame, his body aglow, his eyes twin suns of fire and memory. He could feel the pulse of the divine within him, the echo of something vast and ancient stirring in the marrow of his bones. When he stepped from the fire, the priests fell prostrate before him. The high flamekeeper raised his gaze, voice trembling. "The fire knows you, as it once knew him." Caelir's breath came slowly. He looked down at his hands, still faintly aglow, and felt the weight of 1,000 lifetimes pressing upon him. Far above, in the heavens, the light of the eternal flame flared higher than it had in an age. And across the sea, upon the blighted isle, the sword of Cain whispered a single word into the dark. Awaken. Chapter 3. A Name Reclaimed. The towers of White Tower of Hoeth rose into the sky like the fingers of a dreaming god, carved from pale marble, veined with starlight. The Tower 999 not stand within the heartlands of Ulthuan, but at the edge of the hidden region of Sefri, where the air itself hummed with magic and the winds of Aether coiled like living serpents through the skies. Here, knowledge was not merely preserved, it was worshipped. Runes inscribed upon each stone whispered arcane truths, and libraries stretched endlessly into shadowed catacombs where time folded like parchment. It was a place where truth was dissected as one might dissect a corpse, studied for power, feared for what it could become. And it was here, in the sanctum of the High Loremaster himself, that the fate of Caelir, and perhaps all Ulthuan, was being decided. Teclis, twin of Tyrion and master of magic beyond any since Caledor Dragon-Tamer, stood at the center of a great chamber carved in the shape of a spiral. Around him hovered a constellation of crystalline lenses, each focusing magical light onto a single object, a sliver of flame suspended midair, taken from the eternal flame of Aenarion itself. And around that flame, a web of enchantments pulsed, singing of old names, old blood, and older curses. He had studied it for 3 days without rest. Behind him, the wind ruffled the long indigo robes he wore, woven with threads of moon silver and embroidered with sigils that shifted between languages of mortal and god. His staff leaned against a plinth of obsidian, its head crowned with a shard of pure warpstone imprisoned in chains of gold, a beacon and a warning. Teclis 999, not look up when the doors opened. "He's awake," said the voice of Aenarion, one of his most trusted acolytes. "And waiting." "One—" "No," Teclis murmured, his eyes never leaving the flame. "The winds of magic howl louder each time he breathes. One can feel them. He does not draw from the weave. It bends toward him." Aenarion hesitated. "Is it true, then?" "He is." Teclis turned, and for a moment the weight of centuries settled into the hollows beneath his eyes. "He is Aenarion," he said. "Or what is left of him?" Caelir stood in a vast, domed chamber bathed in soft blue light. The floor beneath him was a mosaic of Ulthuan, each province rendered in perfect detail with colored stones that shimmered faintly beneath his boots. The air here smelled of parchment, incense, and power, old, stifling, and electric. He was alone, for now. The Phoenix Guard who had escorted him to the White Tower stood without, silent and watchful. He felt like a blade in a scabbard too tight. A soft chime echoed, and the chamber's central door opened. Teclis entered, leaning slightly on his staff, though none could say whether it was weakness or merely habit. His gaze, piercing and calm, studied Caelir like one would study an ancient tome, rediscovered in the ashes of a ruined temple. "You feel it, don't you?" Teclis said. His voice was smooth but not soft, like silk drawn over steel. "The weight in your bones, the fire behind your eyes, the echo of blood not your own." Caelir inclined his head. "One do not understand it, but one feel different, like the world has narrowed yet deepened." Teclis nodded slowly. "You are a vessel, Caelir, a bearer of a soul older than even this tower. Aenarion the Defender, the first Phoenix King. The god touched. His soul 999 not pass into the void, it lingered, waiting to be born again. And now, it is you." Caelir stepped back, disbelief and awe mixing in his chest. "That cannot be. Aenarion was a legend, a god among mortals. One Aenarion? No king. One Aenarion? A hunter's son?" "You were," Teclis agreed. "But now you are something more. The flame of Aenarion does not lie. It embraced you. It recognized what lives within your spirit, the shard of the divine and the damned." Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft hum of magic in the air. Finally, Caelir spoke. "What does this mean for me? What am one to do?" Teclis's gaze grew harder. "It means you are a beacon and a storm. There are those who will follow you, and those who will fear you. Already the Everqueen's court stirs with unease. The nobles of Ulthuan whisper that Aenarion's return is a herald of doom. They remember what he wrought, the sword of Cain. Marathi, the sundering." Caelir frowned. "Then they think me a threat?" "Not yet," Teclis said. "But they will, because the moment you choose a path, you will alter the balance of Ulthuan, for good or 99. He turned then and gestured. At his command the chamber's walls shimmered and faded to reveal a projection of the realm Ulthuan, like a crown upon the sea, its provinces pulsing with light. And above it, hovering like a wound in the sky, the blighted isle. Even in illusion, the land was bleak, dead, steeped in shadow. The sword of Cain gleamed faintly upon its altar like a star glimpsed through storm clouds. Teclis pointed to it. "That sword still calls to you. It is not coincidence. It is fate. But fate, one have learned, can be defied." Caelir stared at the image, his jaw clenched. The whispers of the blade had not ceased since he left the shrine. They came in his dreams, in the flicker of flames, in the silence before battle. A hunger older than time, a promise of strength. "One will not take it," Caelir said. "One will not become what he became." Teclis studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, but it was a sad, tired thing. "Many have made that vow. None have stood before the blade without trembling." Before Caelir could respond, the doors opened again, this time to a different company. Ambassador Aenarion of Ulthuan, robed in azure and white, entered, flanked by 2 guards in ceremonial armor. Her face was sharp, her eyes colder than the sea she governed. Behind her stood Lariel, the seeress of Trace, who had first received the vision, her expression tense. "High Lord Master," Aenarion said, bowing only slightly. "We received your summons. Is it true? Has the flame been deceived, or is this boy truly what you claim?" Teclis inclined his head. "He is what the flame has chosen. The soul of Aenarion lives again." The ambassador's lips thinned. "Then Ulthuan is in greater peril than we feared." Caelir's temper stirred. "You think me a threat because one was born with something 1999 not asked for?" "No," Aenarion said coldly. "One think you a threat because the last time Aenarion walked the world, Ulthuan was drowned in blood, torn by 153 war and led into darkness. You are not a symbol of salvation, Caelir. You are a weapon, and weapons must be kept sheathed or destroyed." "Enough," Teclis snapped, voice sharp. "You forget where you stand." Mariel bowed again, but her eyes remained fixed on Caelir with a chill that 999 not fade. "Forgive me, High Lord Master, but if the court asks whether the return of Aenarion is a blessing or a curse, one must answer truthfully." She turned and left, her cloak trailing like storm-tossed waves. Caelir looked to Teclis, uncertain. What now? The High Lord Master stepped forward and placed a hand upon his shoulder. "Now, you prepare. The world will soon know your name. Best you understand what it means before they try to define it for you." Outside the White Tower, the winds rose. In Ulthuan, courtiers whispered of prophecy and fire. In Avalorn, the Everqueen wept at a vision she would not share. And in the dark places beneath Ulthuan, something old and terrible began to stir once more. For the first time in an age, the name Aenarion was spoken aloud in halls of power, and every soul who heard it felt the world shift beneath their feet. Chapter 4. The Weight of the Crown. The ivory spires of Ulthuan, capital of Ulthuan, rose like frozen waves cresting above the sapphire sea. Built upon a series of interlocking islands and adorned with bridges that seemed spun from moonlight, the city was a marvel of elegance and power, a living symbol of the High Elves' ancient glory. White marble streets wound through bustling markets, serene gardens, and temples where the air shimmered with ambient magic. Everywhere gold and silver gleamed beneath banners of blue and gold, the emblems of Phoenix Kings past fluttering like memories in the breeze. It was here that Caelir, son of the wilds, found himself encased not in forest and mist, but in crystal palaces, surrounded by whispering courtiers and the oppressive silence of expectation. He stood at the balcony of the Sunspire, the highest point of the palace, staring out at the sea of dreams. Ships, sleek and radiant, drifted across the harbor below, like feathers on water, their sails billowing with wind conjured by unseen mages. Behind him, the chambers were alive with subtle music and the perfume of rare blossoms, that 999 to mask the tension in the air. 3 days had passed since the confirmation of his identity. 3 days since he was summoned to Ulthuan and formally invited to take residence within the royal court. Aenarion. They spoke it in reverent tones, as if invoking the name might summon the wrath of the gods. Some watched him with awe, others with veiled dread. A few dared both. He had been dressed in courtly finery, robes of deep crimson trimmed with sun-gold, a circlet of starlight silver resting just above his brow. He bore no sword, for the nobility feared what might happen if he carried one. Even his steps were watched. Behind him, the doors to the balcony opened softly. Prince Finubar, the current Phoenix King, entered in robes of seafoam green and pale gold, his expression measured, his silvered beard neatly combed. He moved with the weight of centuries behind him and bore the dignity of someone who had long since surrendered his heart to duty. "You've not spoken much since your arrival," Finubar said quietly, joining Caelir at the rail. "Most find the court overwhelming their first time. And one do not belong here." Caelir replied, his voice low but firm. The king's gaze 999 not waver, and yet the flame accepted you. The shrine lit higher than it has since Aenarion himself walked through it. The Phoenix Guard stirred. "The people see you as a sign." "A sign of what?" Caelir turned to him, frustration flickering in his amber eyes. "Of salvation or of doom? Even your own nobles do not agree." Finubar exhaled slowly. "Perhaps of both. But signs are not truths. They are tools, like blades. It is the wielder who decides their use." He paused, then motioned toward the horizon. "Ulthuan is not as strong as she once was. The shadow of chaos grows. The Druchii grow restless in Negagar. Our borders fray, even as we gild our towers. And now, the soul of our first king has returned, just as war brews anew. Do you believe that is coincidence?" "No," Caelir said. "One do not." Finubar looked at him with an intensity that belied his age. "Then accept the truth of who you are. Join the court. Take your place beside me, not as a prince or general, but as a symbol. We need your presence, if not yet your blade." But Caelir could not answer. Not yet. Not while his nights were haunted. Each time he closed his eyes, he was dragged back into dreams that burned like flame and bled like wounds. In his chambers, when sleep took him, he stood again upon the blighted isle, barefoot upon blackened stone, surrounded by tides of ash. The sky churned with crimson storm clouds, and beneath his feet the earth trembled with whispered prayers and curses. The sword of Cain stood before him, impaled in a cracked altar, pulsing like a heart torn from a dying god. Its blade shimmered with runes that shifted and screamed. And in its reflection he saw not himself, but Aenarion, armored in the bones of dragons, his face carved with agony and wrath. The sword called to him. "One more war," it whispered. "One more flame. One more chance to finish what was begun." Caelir would wake in sweat, heart hammering, his hands clenched into fists. Once, he found his fingertips bleeding, crescent-shaped cuts where his nails had dug into his palms. And on his breath, faintly, he thought he smelled smoke. In the court, the weight of attention never lifted. Ambassador Neriel, ever the skeptic, made her disdain known through polite but calculated omission, never addressing him directly, always speaking through intermediaries. Others, like Prince Aravel of Caledor, openly supported his ascension to prominence, believing his return a sign from the gods to waken a war that had been delayed too long. The Teclis watched it all unfold with the quiet of a man who had seen too much to be surprised. He warned Caelir with few words, but often with long, studying glances. The pressure mounted with each passing day. And then came the invitation, a formal request signed by Alyariel, the Ever-Queen herself, to join her in Avalorn, to walk the groves of Isha, to speak of peace, of visions, of the path forward. Teclis delivered the letter in person. "You must go," he said. She sees what others do not. She was bonded to your soul once, in another life. Perhaps she will help you understand it now." Caelir looked down at the parchment, its lettering delicate and precise, as if written by moonlight. He could feel the blades whisper even now. War, flame, destiny. But Alarielle's voice, even imagined, felt like a balm against the fire. Peace, growth, renewal. That evening Caelir stood once more upon the balcony of the Sunspire. Below, the sea crashed in silver waves against the marble pylons of the city. The sky had turned to twilight, and a single star flickered above, the first to pierce the veil of dusk. He thought of his village, of his mother's hands, calloused and kind, of the forest glades where the wind carried the scent of moss and pine. He thought of the sword of Cain, singing in the dark, and he thought of a crown, not made of gold, but of fire and bone and sorrow. Behind him, the court bustled. Nobles made plans, mages debated prophecy, armies readied for war. But he remained, staring into the horizon, a single thought spiraling endlessly in his mind. Emlyn a king reborn, or a curse yet to bloom? The answer, he knew, waited for him somewhere between the flame and the flower. Chapter 5. Shadows in the West. Far across the sea of chill, beyond the edge of known maps and the dreams of civilized hearts, loomed the continent of Nagaroth, land of black spires, frozen winds, and cruelty refined into art. There, beneath the sky forever choked with storm clouds and the scent of burning iron, rose the citadel of Nagaroth, the city of tears, where towers clawed at the heavens like the fingers of a dying god. Within its heart lay the tower of Malekith, the witch king of the Druchii, whose name was a curse and a warning in every corner of Ulthuan. The throne room was a vast and terrible chamber of obsidian and blood glass, lit only by braziers that burned with green witch fire. Pillars lined the hall, each carved with screaming faces, some stone, others petrified flesh. Tapestries of flayed skin hung in place of banners, each marking a conquest of ages past. No music graced these halls, only the sound of chains and the soft rustle of shadows. And upon a throne wrought from twisted iron and dragon bone, Malekith the Accursed sat in silence, his war mask gleaming like a dark sun. His armor was ancient, forged in the days before the Sundering, and layered with enchantments so potent that they hummed like a caged storm. His left hand, blackened and clawed, rested atop the hilt of a sword far older than even he, while his right hand hung limp, charred beyond healing from the day he tried and failed to walk through the flame of Aenarion. For centuries he had waited, schemed, watched, and now he stirred. Before him knelt Drakal Shadowvane, master of the House of Vipers, a figure clad in robes of woven night, his face hidden behind a porcelain mask etched with runes of silence. Around his waist coiled a serpent familiar, its fangs glistening with toxins that could fell gods. Drakal bowed lower, awaiting command. Malekith's voice, when it came, was not spoken with lungs or throat. It echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling in a tomb. He's returned." Drakal said nothing. Words in this place were weighed in blood. Malekith rose slowly from his throne, each motion deliberate, as if the very act of standing bore the weight of nations. He descended the steps with the grace of a predator long caged. "One felt it the moment the eternal flame rose," Malekith murmured, more to himself than to his servant. "The soul of my father. It burns again, not as ghost or shade, but alive, anew." He stopped before one of the scrying mirrors that floated in the air like a shard of moonlight trapped in crystal. With a motion he swept his clawed hand across its surface. The image shimmered, first with smoke, then with vision. Caelir. He stood upon the balcony of the Sunspire, the wind pulling at his crimson cloak, eyes lost in distant thought. The resemblance was uncanny, the bone structure, the stance, but it was the soul, that fire, which drew Malekith's gaze. Aenarion. The name stung like a blade. My father returns not in majesty, but in this whelp. Malekith's voice dropped, laced with venom. A second chance at a throne he abandoned, a crown one bled for, burned for, was denied. A tremor passed through the tower. Runes flared on the walls as magic twisted in response to his fury. Drakal finally spoke, his voice soft, coiling through the air like smoke. "Shall we destroy him?" Malekith turned slowly, his gaze searing through the mask. "Not yet. His name is not yet known in every court. His power is still raw, unshaped. But soon, the princes of Ulthuan will rally to him. The people will call him heir. They will weep for Aenarion's fire, and forget the child who was cast aside." The Witch King's hand curled into a fist, blackened fingers groaning against warped metal. Elon must die before he becomes more than a man, before prophecy feeds him, before the sword calls louder than reason. He raised his hand again, and another mirror shimmered, this time revealing a council chamber within Lothern, where nervous nobles debated the strange omens of Caelir's arrival. "Send the blades of Anlek," Malekith ordered. "Send Vela Darkfang." Drakal flinched, ever so slightly. "She has not been loosed since the siege of Shadrakai." "Exactly," Malekith said. "Let them see her. Let her kill quietly or burn their illusions with blood. Either way, Caelir must not live to cross blades with me." He turned back toward the throne, his voice lower now, half bitter, half sorrowful. "He will not suffer the same fate as one, rejected by flame, forgotten by kin. One would rather see Ulthuan sink beneath the sea than let him claim what should have been mine." That night, beneath the withered moon of Nagagoth, 3 sleek vessels slipped out of the port of Cla Carond, each shaped like the spine of some nightmarish beast. No oars moved them, no sails caught the wind. They moved as shadows, driven by sorcery and vengeance. Aboard the lead ship stood Vela Darkfang, cloaked in crimson leathers, her eyes a void behind a veil of black mesh. She was Malekith's dagger, his wrath-given flesh. Her voice had never been heard. Her blade had never needed justification. Behind her marched warriors clad in silence, bearing swords crafted not to kill, but to unmake. They would not go to court, they would not speak with lords. They would find Caelir, and they would end him. In Lothern, as the moon cast silver fire upon the city's canals, Caelir dreamt again. But this time, the sword of Cain 999 not speak. Instead, he stood within the ruins of a great hall, walls crumbling, corpses at his feet. A voice spoke from the darkness, not the blades, but another. "You wear his face." Caelir turned. A figure stepped from the shadows, cloaked in night. A crown of barbs rested upon his brow. Eyes of fire and pain met his. "Malekith." "You are not Aenarion," the Witch King said, voice quiet and cold. "You are his echo, and one Aemon his son. One will not be denied twice." Then the vision shattered, and Caelir awoke with a gasp, the scent of blood heavy in the air. Far off, in the western dark, shadows moved, swift, silent, and sharpened with purpose, and the first of many blades had been drawn. Chapter 6. Duel in the Dusk. The sun dipped low over Lothern, staining the sky in hues of molten amber and blood red as the city of towers and canals surrendered itself to the quiet majesty of twilight. The golden bridges stretched long shadows across the water, and the streets grew still, their usual pageantry of nobles and merchants giving way to the hush of evening prayers and lantern-lit wanderings. Somewhere, soft music drifted from a balcony, mingling with a distant cry of gulls. Caelir walked alone. He had slipped away from the court hours earlier, leaving behind the suffocating pressure of silk-robed diplomats and the wary glances of elf lords who praised him in public and plotted in private. He needed air, space, silence. The city, though foreign and polished, had corners still untouched by pomp, gardens half forgotten, walkways cloaked in ivy and scented with starflowers. Here, on the outer edge of the Moonwater district, the sea kissed the marble steps in gentle waves, and a lone crescent bridge arched over the river like a spine of silver. It was here they struck. A whisper of wind, then silence. Caelir froze, instincts sharpened by 100 dreams of war. The shadows shifted. From the hollows beneath the bridge and the hedges lining the garden path, they emerged. Sleek figures draped in scaled armor of deep violet and shadow steel, their faces hidden behind masks sculpted into sneering visages of serpents and wolves. Each moved like liquid death, too fast, too silent for any ordinary man to detect. But Caelir was no ordinary man. Drukish. He spat the word like venom. The lead assassin gave no reply. Her movements were smooth, precise, a duelist's grace mingled with a predator's cruelty. Twin daggers gleamed in her hands, curved like fangs, and etched with runes that shimmered sickly under the setting sun. Behind her, 5 others spread like smoke on the wind, encircling him with cold deliberation. Vela Darkfang had come. They attacked without warning. The first moved faster than a blink, blade aimed for Caelir's throat. He ducked low, instinct guiding him, and drove his shoulder into the attacker's midsection with enough force to crack ribs. The assassin flew back, crashing through a fountain with a spray of marble shards and blood. Another came from behind, silent, a phantom. Caelir twisted, grabbing the assailant's wrist. 1499 strike and driving the blade into his attacker's own neck. The elf gurgled, eyes wide in shock as he fell. It was then that Caelir felt it. A heat surged through his veins, wild, ancient, furious. The fire within him, long dormant, awoke with a roar. The dreams, the whispers, the aching echo of Aenarion's legacy surged to the surface. For a heartbeat he stood still, and the world seemed to pause with him. Then he screamed, not in pain, but in rage, and light burst from his skin like sunlight through storm clouds. The Druchi faltered. It was not magic in the traditional sense. It was not a spell learned or spoken. It was wrath made manifest, the divine fury of a soul that had once walked as a god among mortals. Caelir leapt into the fray, and the dusk itself seemed to recoil. He grabbed the nearest assassin by the helm and crushed it like brittle porcelain, then turned and caught another 1499 leap, slamming her into the marble walkway so hard the stone cracked beneath her body. Her scream was cut short by the sound of her spine breaking. 2 more came at him in tandem, moving as mirrors of death. One slashed at his throat, the other feinted for his leg. Caelir let the first blade glance off his shoulder, barely flinching, then seized the attacker's neck and hurled him into his companion. Their bodies collided with a sickening crunch, both sliding into the river below, blood staining the water red. Only Vela remained. She watched, motionless, her eyes narrowed behind her veil. Her knives twitched in her grip, eager for blood. "You burn like him," she hissed, voice a breath of silk and steel. "But you are not him." Caelir didn't answer. He stepped forward, his breath coming in low, volcanic gasps, his eyes aglow with a golden light that 999 not belonged to this world. They clashed. Vela moved like a serpent, her strikes rapid, precise, aimed to cripple rather than kill. Caelir met each one with the fury of a rising storm, his bare hands deflecting blades that should have torn flesh, his movements fueled by something beyond mortal strength. Sparks flew, stone shattered, the air between them sizzled. She danced away, but not quickly enough. Caelir caught her wrist, 1499 thrust, and slammed her into the bridge's base. Her head struck marble, her knives scattering. He loomed over her, light and fire blazing from his skin. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in awe. "Finish it," she spat, blood running from her temple. "Be your father's son." But Caelir hesitated. The fire dimmed. "One ea not him," he growled, voice like thunder rolling through mountains. "One ea not he could not be." And he turned his back on her. It was a mistake. With a shriek, she lunged, one last hidden blade gleaming in her boot. Caelir spun, faster than thought, and drove his hand forward, not with fist, but flame. A column of white-hot fire erupted from his palm, engulfing her. Her scream echoed across the water, long and ragged, before it vanished in smoke and ash. Only blackened bone and melted steel remained. Then silence. Caelir stood alone, the wind swirling around him, the river hissing as droplets of molten stone hissed into steam. Above, nobles leaned from balconies, eyes wide. Across the district, bells rang, alarm, summons. In the distance, the Phoenix Guard moved. Whispers began, faster than fire. "He walks with flame." The fire obeys him. Aenarion lives again. Caelir looked down at his hands, still trembling, still glowing faintly with the embers of divine rage. He felt no triumph, only weariness, and the haunting echo of the sword's voice, curling through the ashes. "There will always be more. You were made for this." And far across the sea, in the heart of Nagaroth, Malekith felt the ripple of divine power and cursed in fury. The blade had failed, but the war had just begun. Chapter 7. The Council Divided. The hall of the Moonstone Throne was a place where kings whispered and gods once walked. Hewn from a single slab of moonlit quartz and crowned with an open dome through which starlight streamed even on clouded nights, it was the sacred heart of Ulthuan's governance. Here, the High Council of Ulthuan convened in times of peril, when omens darkened, when wars loomed, or when the fate of their world trembled in the balance. Now, beneath its vaulted ceiling and amid the spectral glow of arcane light, the assembled lords, princes, and priestesses stood on the edge of a storm. In the center, seated upon the elevated moonstone throne, Finubar the Seafarer, Phoenix King of Ulthuan, presided with the detachment of one who had witnessed empires rise and fall like tides. His pale face was carved from stone, unreadable, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty rare in one who ruled from the Dawn Isles to the westernmost spires of Lothern. The chamber was filled with the whisper of robes, the clink of ceremonial arms, and the undercurrent of tightly leashed tension. Robed seers of Hoeth stood beside golden-helmed generals of Caledor. From the jeweled gardens of Avalorn came Elariel's envoys, bearing branches of silver-leafed trees. From Aenarion rode swift-limbed warriors cloaked in blue, their eyes always on the exits. And from Lothern, the seat of power and commerce, the silk-robed nobles stood in rows, their expressions ranging from awe to disdain. But none spoke louder or stood closer to the center of the storm than two brothers, Tyrion, defender of Ulthuan, and Teclis, high lore-master of the White Tower. They stood apart from one another, both in space and in silence. Tyrion, tall, golden-haired, draped in the shimmering mail of the Lion Guard, radiated the strength of a warrior born to lead. His face, though handsome and proud, was tight, with barely contained emotion. Teclis, hunched slightly beneath his heavy robes, leaned on his staff of ash and crystal, his keen eyes flicking from speaker to speaker with the precision of a master of chess watching his pieces align. At the heart of the gathering, the subject of every glance and whispered debate, stood Caelir. He had been summoned to stand before the council, though not as a prisoner nor as a guest. His robes were simple, his bearing solemn. But his presence, charged with the aftermath of the duel with the assassins, filled the hall like a crack of thunder before the storm. The council had already been in session for hours. He incinerated one of Malekith's assassins with fire, called forth by no incantation, said Lady Myrellis of Lothern, her voice sharp and measured. "What magic is this? What mortal burns with divine wrath and yet claims restraint?" "Saved our people," countered Prince Arendier of Aenarion. "Would you have had him fall so the Druchii could carve their way into our court unopposed?" "That is not the question," snapped Prince Valador of Safri, rising. "The question is what this means. If he is truly Aenarion reborn, then prophecy has changed course. The balance is shattered." A hush fell, as Alarielle the Everqueen rose from her seat. Her beauty was ethereal, untouched by time. Hair like woven moonlight cascaded down her back, and her voice, when it came, carried the weight of life and sorrow. "The land speaks," she said. "The forests of Avalorn bloom and wither in the same breath. Spirits weep and sing in the same breath. They feel the return of something vast. Old pain, old power." Her gaze turned to Caelir, and though her eyes softened, her voice remained clear. "One walked in dream with you, Caelir. One saw what you were and what you may become. One do not fear you, but one fear for you." That was when Tyrion stepped forward. His voice carried not just across the chamber, but into the marrow of every elf present. "One stood in the shadow of Aenarion's legacy since my birth. One bore the sword of Cain. One know the madness it brings, the destruction, the ruin." He looked at Caelir directly, and something ancient and broken passed between them. "You're not ready. You wield power, yes, but you are a storm untethered. If you rise, you will not ascend, you will fall. And when you fall, Ulthuan will fall with you." Caelir's jaw clenched. "So you would lock me away, hide me because you fear what one might become?" Tyrion 999 not answer. Instead, he turned to Finnebar. "My king, one propose he be placed under watch, not as a prisoner, but as a ward of the crown. He must be studied, contained." Teclis stepped forward now, his staff ringing softly against the stone. "It's madness," he said, voice calm and razor-edged. "You would chain destiny because it makes you uncomfortable? You speak of containment like it is wisdom, but it is fear dressed in ceremonial robes." He turned to Caelir. "This soul has been forged in war, drowned in flame, and yet he still chooses restraint. That is strength. That is hope." "And if he chooses war?" Valantor asked. "Then he will not stand alone," Teclis said, "because the worst thing we can do is abandon him now. Aenarion made his mistakes in isolation with no counsel, no guidance. Let us not repeat that error." The chamber broke into murmurs and hushed argument. Finnebar raised his hand, silencing them all. He looked down at Caelir for a long moment. "Your presence divides my court, Caelir," he said. "Some see salvation, others see fire and ruin. One see both, but one also see choice. That is what your return has given us. Choice." He stood slowly from the moonstone throne. "You will remain in Lothern for now. You will train under our greatest minds and be given access to the lore you seek. But your movements will be watched. You will attend this council as a voice, but not as a ruler. If you are Aenarion reborn, then you must prove to us that you are more than what he became." Caelir bowed his head, not in defeat, but in grim acceptance. "One will not be the weapon others fear," he said softly. "But if war comes, one will not be the shield that shatters, either." The session adjourned, the nobles drifting into side chambers to mutter and maneuver. Tyrion brushed past Teclis without a word. The silence between the brothers deepened. Teclis lingered at Caelir's side. "This was only the first storm," he said. "The next will not be born of words." Caelir looked back at the throne, now empty. "And when it comes," he replied, "one hopes the council remembers which gods they once believed in." Outside, night fell over Ulthuan. But in every palace and every province, the name Caelir now echoed like a war drum. Some would raise goblets in secret to his return. Others would sharpen blades. The council was divided, and the world had begun to tilt. Chapter 8. Temptation of the Blade. The sea crossing to the Blighted Isle was unlike any Caelir had known. The sky had turned pale and thin by the time the sleek, rune-carved vessel passed beyond the wards of Lothern. Gone was the endless azure of the Sea of Dreams. Here the waters churned black and restless, and the wind carried the taste of iron and ash. The sailors, 999, not speak. Their eyes, though unclouded by magic, were glazed with a silence bred from reverence and dread. Each one had sworn not to set foot on the isle itself, and their captain would not let the keel touch the cursed shore. Instead, Caelir crossed the last stretch alone. A boat, small and narrow as a coffin, bore him toward the shrouded land. Above, the sun dimmed as though repelled by the aura of what lay ahead. His fingers tightened around the hilt of the ceremonial sword at his waist, not for protection, but for remembrance. He had left his court blade behind. Steel was meaningless where he was going. The Blighted Isle emerged from the mist like the humped back of a slumbering beast. Dark stone, jagged cliffs, and a shoreline bereft of life. The very sand was ashen, the trees gnarled and leafless, their bark stained black by centuries of death. No birds sang, no insects stirred. Even the wind dared not whistle. It was not simply abandoned. It was forsaken. Caelir stepped ashore in silence. His boots crunched over bone and dust. This was the place where Aenarion had drawn the sword of Cain and doomed an age, where gods had screamed and blood had flowed like rivers, where a world had been cracked open and the flood of war had drowned an empire. He walked now upon its grave. The path to the altar was ancient, worn by time and weather, but never reclaimed by nature. No moss grew here, no lichen clung to the stone. Only silence walked beside him. At times, Caelir thought he heard voices, faint and indistinct, like echoes inside his skull, whispering, weeping, laughing. The language was not Elthuan, but older, the tongue of gods long dead or maddened beyond recognition. The 999 not cover his ears. He kept walking. He passed through the field of fallen kings, where broken statues lay half-buried, effigies of those who had once ruled and who had once sought the sword. Some bore proud faces, others masks of terror. All had cracks running down their features. Some wept. Some screamed. One statue had no face at all, just a polished mirror surface that reflected Caelir's own face back at him, flickering between his features and those of Aenarion. He turned away quickly. The ascent began. The trail wound like a scar up the slope of a blackened cliff, at the summit of which loomed the altar of Cain. The climb was steep, treacherous, jagged stone steps slick with frost that never melted, even under the 1499 sun. With every step the air grew colder, not the cold of weather, but of spirit, as if the world here had exhaled its soul long ago, leaving only shadow behind. And then he reached it. The altar stood atop the cliff like a wound cut into the earth itself, surrounded by a circle of cracked obsidian pillars. The sky above churned with silent storm clouds, though no lightning fell. In the center, upon a pedestal carved from bone and basalt, stood the sword of Cain. Did 999 not glow? 999 not move? But it watched. The blade was long, cruel, and jagged, black as void, yet veined with veins of crimson that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. Runes crawled along its length, shifting like insects beneath the surface. The hilt was wrapped in leather that looked suspiciously like skin. The air around it shimmered, distorted, as if reality itself recoiled from the sword. Caelir took a step forward. His breath steamed in the chill air, his heart a hammer in his chest. 999 not know how long he stood there, staring. Minutes, hours, lifetimes. He heard the whispers again, clearer now. Not words. Intentions, promises, warnings, echoes of battles yet to be fought. Take me. The voice was not his, nor was it truly the sword's. It was something in heaven, something that existed in the marrow of his being, in the air around him. You are Aenarion. You are wrath. You are justice. Caelir dropped to one knee, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of presence pressing down upon him. He reached out, fingers trembling, hovering inches from the hilt. The world waited. His hand stopped. One will not take you, he whispered. The sword pulsed, plying it. One I am not him. The runes flared like fireflies caught in the throes of agony. One will not be your weapon. A shriek echoed across the altar, not from the sword, but from the world itself. The sky flashed, the ground trembled, the pillars cracked. But Caelir stood. He rose, fists clenched, teeth bared. You are a curse. A wound pretending to be a cure. You ended him. You will not begin me. And he turned away. The whisper followed him down the mountain like a lover left waiting. You will come back. They always do. When the world burns, you will beg to be my hand. Caelir never looked back. The mist closed behind him as he descended, leaving the sword alone once more. But far across the sea, in the highest tower of the White Palace, the seeress Lariel woke screaming. The sword had not been drawn, but for the first time in an age it had listened. Chapter 9. The Beast Within. The sky above northern Ulthuan bled with fire. It began at dawn, as all calamities do, quietly, without warning, without mercy. The Chaos Raiders had come in the night, crossing the treacherous sea from the northern wastes on long ships forged from the bones of beasts and the corpses of drowned sailors. Their sails were tattered and black, painted with sigils that writhed even when the wind 999 not blow. By the time the sentinels of Trace raised the alarm, the shores were already aflame. Villages along the coast burned like torches against the horizon. Screams mingled with the roar of the sea and the guttural chants of the invaders. Smoke thickened the air, and the sky itself seemed to darken, as if the gods turned their faces away from the carnage below. Caelir arrived as the first light broke through that storm. He rode at the head of a small host, warriors of Lothern, scouts of Trace, and the swift bowmen of Aenarion, gathered hastily under banners still damp from the dew of morning. Behind him, Tyrion's own veterans rode in grim silence, their eyes wary of the man who now led them. Though Finubar had not yet named him prince or lord, rumor had already made him something more. The reborn king, the phoenix's shadow. Aenarion returned. They followed him nonetheless. The plain below was a battlefield drowned in smoke and fury. Chaos warbands had swept inland, their warriors clad in brass and black iron, their flesh tattooed with runes that pulsed with unholy light. Some rode beasts that looked stitched from nightmare, others charged on foot, wielding axes larger than mortal men. Above them, the sky churned with the forms of screaming daemons, fleeting, formless shapes that flickered between existence and madness. Caelir drew his sword. It was not the sword of Cain, but the weapon flared with faint light all the same, a whisper of the divine heat that burned within him. "Form ranks," he roared, his voice carried across the field like a thunderclap. "For Ulthuan." The elves rallied, shields locked, spears braced. The raiders surged forward like a tide of black mud. Then steel met flesh. The first clash was deafening. Spears shattered on shields. Arrows hissed through the air, and the screams of the dying mingled with the war cries of the living. Caelir cut his way through the first ranks of chaos warriors like a blade through smoke. Every swing of his sword left arcs of light in the air, and where his blade struck, armor melted, flesh vaporized, and daemons howled. Yet with every kill, something in him stirred. The rhythm of battle, the scent of blood and iron, the heat of bodies pressing against him, it all awakened a hunger deep in his bones. At first it was familiar, like the thrill of survival. But it grew, it thickened, it fed. The world blurred around him. His heart pounded like a war drum, and his vision bled red. The more he fought, the less he remembered himself. He saw flashes, memories not his own, the roar of dragons overhead, their scales burning like gold, armies in silver armor stretching to the horizon, a figure, his figure, standing upon a mountain of corpses, face masked by fire and sorrow, the sword of Cain in his grasp. He remembered the smell of daemons burning, the sound of gods screaming, the taste of victory and damnation all at once. Aenarion? The name thundered in his skull. He staggered, blade dripping with molten gore, as the battle raged on around him. Chaos champions bellowed their dark prayers, and still he cut them down. Their axes shattered against his parries, their armor split like parchment. He felt invincible. He felt infinite. And he hated it, because he could feel something else, something watching from within, a presence behind his heart, whispering in a voice made of smoke and memory. You remember, don't you? The glory, the power, the right to kill. Caelir roared, half in rage, half in denial, and swung his sword with all his strength. The blow cleaved through a warlord twice his size and split the man's corrupted mount in two. The explosion of heat that followed turned the earth to glass. Elves and raiders alike halted for a heartbeat, shielding their eyes from the radiance. When the light faded, Caelir stood alone, amid a ring of scorched corpses. His armor steamed. His eyes glowed like suns. The air itself rippled around him. And then the Phoenix Guard appeared. They moved like shadows of judgment, descending from the hills, with spears gleaming. Their halberds struck with precise, merciless grace, cutting through chaos reinforcements that had begun to circle. The tide turned. The raiders, seeing their champions fall and their demons dissolve, faltered and broke. Some fled toward the sea, others fought to the last, their bodies consumed by the same madness that drove them across the ocean. But Caelir 999 not see them flee. He was lost to the storm within. He saw instead the world as it once had been, the skies of the First War, when demons poured like locusts across Ulthuan, when dragons screamed and gods bled. He remembered the faces of those who had stood beside him, their names long since dust. Caelir the Dragon Lord, Morathi's dark smile, the Ever-Queen's tears upon his gauntlet. He remembered the moment he drew the sword. He remembered the fire that was not his own, and he remembered loving it. "Caelir!" a voice shouted, distant and echoing. "Caelir, stop!" Hands grasped him, familiar, desperate. He turned, eyes wild, sword raised. It was Tyrion. The defender of Ulthuan stood before him, helm cracked, armor drenched in blood not his own. He stared at Caelir with a 1009 of awe and terror. "Enough," Tyrion said. "The battle is won." But Caelir 999 not lower his sword. His breath came ragged, his pulse thundered in his ears. All he saw was another rival, another warrior who stood where he once had stood, beside her, the Ever-Queen. A whisper rose in his mind, sweet and venomous. "He took what was yours." The blade trembled in his hand. Tyrion's eyes narrowed. His voice softened. "Do not let it claim you." Caelir blinked. The vision shattered. The field returned, real, broken, silent. He stumbled back, dropping his sword. It hit the earth with a sound like thunder. The glow faded from his eyes. The divine fire guttered and died, leaving only smoke and exhaustion. All around him, the dead lay in circles. Chaos warriors, blackened and twisted, their bodies still smoldering. His soldiers stood at a distance, uncertain, fearful. They had seen too much. Tyrion knelt beside him, his hand gripping Caelir's shoulder. "You must master it," he said quietly, "before it masters you." Caelir looked up, eyes hollow. "It's not just power," he whispered. "It's memory, his rage, his grief, his war. It's inside me. One can feel it clawing at my soul." Tyrion's grip tightened. "Then fight it, Caelir. Fight it as he could not." In the distance, the sun broke through the clouds, casting gold over the carnage. The sea glittered red with the reflection of fire and blood. The chaos threat had been repelled. But the victory felt hollow. That night, when the survivors made camp among the charred ruins, Caelir sat apart from the others, staring into the flames. The crackle of the fire reminded him of the pulse of the sword, the whisper of its call. And when he closed his eyes, he saw Aenarion's reflection staring back, half divine, half damned. "You are me," it said, "and you always will be." Caelir woke before dawn, breath shaking, his hands still trembling. The battle was over. The war within had only begun. Chapter 10. The Ever-Queen's Judgment. The wilds of Avalorn were unlike any other realm in Ulthuan, a land where nature breathed with divine rhythm, untouched by time or blade. Here, the forests were ancient and vast, their trees tall as towers, their roots older than empires. Silver leaves shimmered on branches that whispered in voices only spirits understood, and every flower glowed faintly with inner light, casting the glades in perpetual twilight. This was not merely a place, it was a living memory of Isha, the elven goddess of life and renewal. At the heart of it all stood the Glen of Whispering Waters, the sacred sanctuary of Alarielle, the Ever-Queen of Ulthuan, chosen of Isha, and high priestess of all life. Caelir entered the glen alone. He had passed through green-shadowed paths, guided not by soldiers but by sprites of light, each a fragment of the forest's will. No words were spoken. The guardians of Avalorn 999 not greet him with blades or protocol. They simply watched, from the branches, from the waters, from the air itself. They knew who he was, and they knew what stirred within him. He stepped through the final veil of willow branches and into the clearing. There, surrounded by a ring of silver-petaled lotus flowers and streams of water that danced without wind, stood Alarielle. She 999 not wear a crown, she 999 not sit upon a throne. Instead, she stood barefoot in the water, the hem of her gown drifting like mist, Her hair was long and luminous, the color of dawnlight on dew. Flowers bloomed where she stepped, and butterflies traced orbits around her like sentinels of peace. But her eyes, deep and green as forest pools, held a weight that defied her grace. She turned toward him and smiled, though there was sorrow in it. Caelir. The sound of his name in her voice was like a chord struck upon a harp older than the world. He bowed, deeply. Ever-Queen. She shook her head gently. One Irem, not a queen to you, Caelir. Not today. Not now. Here, one Iriel Alariel, and you are the soul one once loved. The words struck like lightning in still air. Caleb froze, stunned. You? Remember? Not in the way you do. Not in dreams or visions. But the soul remembers what the mind forgets. One have felt your presence since you were born. One have watched you from afar, as one watches a forgotten song carried again by the wind. She stepped closer, and with each step the glen brightened. Birds began to sing softly in the canopy. You are Aenarion's echo, she said, and yet not Aenarion. You carry his flame, his sorrow, his fury, but you are not bound to his fate. Not yet. Caelir looked down, the weight of her gaze too much to bear. One don't know who one am anymore. Every time one fight, every time one bleed, one feel him, his voice, his wrath. Sometimes one forget where he ends and one begin. Alariel reached out and touched his cheek. Her fingers were cool and calming, like a spring breeze across scorched skin. Do you know why Aenarion fell? She asked gently. It was not the sword alone. It was not even the war. It was the belief that he had no other choice, that sacrifice was the only path left. She stepped back, her expression hardening like frost forming over water. One see the same belief growing in you. He clenched his fists. What choice do one have? The world burns again. Chaos rises. The Druchii send assassins into our courts. The council fears me. Tyrion, he watches me like a wolf waiting for the scent of blood. You have the same choice, he 999, Alariel replied. To choose peace before war, to heal before striking, to lead not as a god of vengeance, but as a guardian of life. She turned, gesturing to the forest. Look at Avalorn. These woods have suffered, burned, defiled, torn by war. Yet they grow. They choose to grow. That is their power. That is your power, if you will accept it. So if you desire to be free, she pointed, examined carefully. Caelir stepped forward, troubled. But what if fate demands more? What if one cannot be the man you hope one I am? Alariel turned back to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then one will mourn you, she whispered, as one once mourned him. Silence fell between them. At last she reached into the water and drew forth a flower, blue, delicate, and pulsing with faint light. She pressed it into his hand. This is the cereal bloom. It grows only once every 1,000 years. Only for those who walk the line between life and ruin. Keep it. As long as it lives, so too does your choice. Caelir closed his hand around it, the glow seeping through his fingers. The 999 not speak. There were no words for what she had given him. Before he left the glen, Alariel spoke one final time, her voice quiet as leaves falling in autumn. One cannot stop the storm that approaches, Caelir. One cannot shield you from the pain to come. But one will walk beside you for as long as you walk the path of life. If you choose otherwise, her eyes closed, then you will walk it alone. He nodded and turned away, his footsteps quiet on the moss. The Everqueen watched him go, her expression unreadable. and far above the forest canopy, dark clouds gathered once more. Chapter 11. Fires of the North. The wind howled across the jagged peaks of the Aenuli Mountains, carrying with it the scent of blood, ash, and something older, something fouler. Above, the sky had turned the color of bruised flesh, swirling with sickly hues of green and violet as the fabric of reality itself thinned beneath the weight of the encroaching storm. Chaos had come to Ulthuan. From the cursed north, across the roiling seas and shattered ice floes, the legions of the Ever-Chosen had returned. At their head marched warlords marked by dark gods, mortals twisted into monsters by the gifts of the ruinous powers, beasts bound in chains of blood, sorcerers whose mouths gushed flame, and warriors clad in brass and bone, their roars shaking the mountains themselves. Their target, the gates of Ulthuan, Ulthuan's last great bastion in the north. The fortress of Tur-Evres, long neglected and thought impenetrable due to its surrounding cliffs and ancient enchantments, was the first to fall. Its towers, long silent since the days of the Great War against chaos, burned with unnatural flame. Those who had not fled died screaming amidst the shattered ruins. The survivors spoke of demons walking among the living, of shadows that bled, of weapons that whispered blasphemies in the voices of lost kin. By the time the High Council could react, the north was ablaze. Caelir rode toward the flames. He had not waited for summons or council approval. The moment the alarm reached the Moonstone throne, he had gathered every warrior who would follow, veterans of Trace, bowmasters of Ivris who had escaped the fall, sword dancers from Avalorn, even a handful of Phoenix Guard who moved without command. They followed not a prince nor a king, but a name, a soul, a flame. The wind of battle howled ahead, and Caelir answered. They reached the burning hills of Gaenvale by dusk. Smoke blotted out the sun. The land was torn, ruptured by warp fire and clawed tracks the size of siege towers. Where once stood quiet settlements and hidden groves, now only scorched earth remained. Screams echoed from distant valleys, and the wind carried the maddened laughter of cultists as they hunted the fleeing and the wounded. Caelir rode at the front of his column, his face grim, his armor scorched from past battles. The Siriel bloom gifted by Alariel was tucked beneath his breastplate, still pulsing faintly with blue light as if resisting the darkness that surrounded them. "Scouts?" he asked without turning. Talinus, a wiry ranger of Aenarion, pulled his steed alongside. 5 legions, Northmen, beasts, and worse. They hold the pass. Ivres is lost. The gates of Lothern stand next, but only barely. The defenders? Scattered, a few hundred at most, routed, retreating, broken. No command left. They're led by a Tyrannok captain, Malon Vareth, wounded, half-mad. Caelia's jaw clenched. Then, they 100 have me. The battlefield was a smoldering valley that had once been a sacred glade. Trees now burned like torches, their sap boiling into steam. The stone outposts had crumbled, their defenders slaughtered. The Chaos forces had encamped, building grotesque shrines from the corpses of their enemies and their own fallen. Fires burned in great pyres, feeding upon everything, wood, flesh, and magic alike. The surviving defenders, no more than 300, were pinned against a broken ridge near the southern mouth of the pass. They were exhausted, bloodied, and leaderless, their morale cracked and crumbling. Caelir found them amidst screams and moaning, crouched behind fallen wagons and shattered palisades, their eyes wide with fear and disbelief. He dismounted without flourish. His arrival was silent but undeniable. The wounded rose to their feet as if drawn by gravity itself. Helmets were lifted, blades lowered in disbelief. "It's him," someone whispered. "Aenarion." "No," Caelir said, his voice clear. not Aenarion, Caelir. But one carry his fire, and today one burned for you. Before the sun could fully fall, he had reformed them. Banners were raised again. Wounded were pulled to the rear, defensive lines redrawn. Caelir moved among them, not above them, placing his hand on the shoulders of each warrior, whispering words of resolve that carried like spells through the air. "You are not broken," he told one bloodied swordmaster. "You are tested." "You are not the last," he told a weeping novice priestess. "You are the beginning." The fires of the north reflected in their eyes. They would not run. The Chaos Horde came at twilight, 1,000 strong, their war cries howling like the voices of the damned. Beasts with chitinous limbs and eyes like molten metal bounded across the field, while warriors in skull-shaped helms charged with axes high, bellowing names of gods that no sane tongue should speak. Caelir stood atop the ridge, sword raised, the wind of the north wrapping around him like a cloak of storm. "Hold the line," he cried, his voice magnified by the very wind. "Let the gods see what elves are made of." The first wave hit like a hurricane. Steel clashed with steel, arrows sang and screamed, beasts crashed into shields, flinging warriors like dolls. Magic flared, bolts of flame, lances of ice, and surges of radiant energy burst across the battlefield as mage priests joined the fray. Caelir was everywhere. He fought not like a man but a myth. His sword carved arcs of searing light, and each strike sent shockwaves through the ranks of chaos. He leapt from the ridge into the heart of the horde, shattering a chaos chariot with a single blow. His voice rang out, fierce and defiant, even as blood soaked his armor. But the fire grew wild. The more he killed, the more he felt it, the other's soul rising within him, urging him onward, feeding on the slaughter. Aenarion's fury swelled in his veins, drowning logic, drowning mercy. His strikes grew heavier, the world turned red. He saw not enemies, but shapes, shadows, obstacles. "Caelir," cried Solanus, "pull back, you're too deep." He didn't hear. He roared, a sound that was not his own, and released a wave of golden flame that incinerated a dozen chaos warriors. Their screams were torn from the world before their bodies hit the ground. The flames caught even some of his own. He blinked, stunned, stepping back. They stared at him, not with awe, but fear. He staggered, falling to one knee. The fire flickered, but at 999 not leave. 1,000 not him, he muttered, breath shaking. 1,000 not him. But the fire whispered otherwise. "You're exactly who you need to be." Then from the darkness of the enemy's ranks a horn sounded, a withdrawal. The chaos forces, battered and bewildered by the resurgence of the elves, and unprepared for a force so reinvigorated, retreated into the smoke. The battle was won. But at what cost? Caelir stood at the ridge once more, watching the enemy vanish into the north. Around him his warriors tended the wounded, wept for the lost, and whispered of the fire they had seen unleashed. Some praised it, others looked away. A priestess of Lilith approached him, her expression unreadable. "You saved us," she said, "but you frightened even the sky." He nodded slowly. "One frightened myself." She placed a hand over his heart, above the spot where the cereal bloom had once pulsed. It was dark. "You're losing it," she said. "No," Caelir whispered. 1,000 choosing." And he turned toward the mountains, where war was far from over. In the north, the fire still raged, and the flame within him was growing ever harder to contain. Chapter 12. Sons of Cain. The road to the Temple of Cain was not marked on any map. No cartographer dared draw the path. No bard sang its course. It was said that those who found the temple had not discovered it by will, but by summons. The god of murder 999 not called to pilgrims, he called to weapons, to vengeance made flesh. And Caelir had heard the call. It came not in dreams, but in moments between breath and battle, when the blood was fresh and hot in his mouth, when his heart raced like drums before the charge. It came in the flicker of his reflection, in the sheen of a sword, in the heat that roared behind his ribs like an imprisoned pyre. The fire was changing. He feared it. He needed to understand it. They told him the temple was buried deep in the blackstone cliffs of Nagari, where shadows clung like oil and the sea struck the rocks below with mournful fury. He left his retainers behind, ignoring Tyrion's warnings and Teclis's silence. He crossed forest and stone, scale-ridden rivers and silent villages emptied long ago. The land itself grew darker with every league, less civilized, more raw, as if time had been carved out and fed to the crows. Finally, in a canyon shaped like a scar torn into the world, he found it. The Temple of Cain rose not from the earth, but bled from it. Its structure was jagged and asymmetrical, built from basalt and bones slick with a sheen of sacrificial oils. Braziers of black fire flanked the entrance, and statues lined the path, warriors with twisted forms, their faces locked in ecstasy and agony, arms raised in eternal offering. The air smelled of iron and incense, of death and reverence. He stepped forward. The witch-elves emerged silently, as if birthed from the very stone, barefoot, clad in blood-slicked leathers, their hair braided with bones. Eyes painted black watched him with a 1009 of lust, curiosity, and scorn. Their knives never stopped moving, tracing patterns in the air that whispered prayers to a god who drank screams like wine. He said nothing. He had come unarmed, as was custom for those who sought an audience with the sons of Cain. A figure emerged from the shadows of the inner sanctum. He was tall, shrouded in blood-red robes etched with runes that pulsed with a heartbeat of their own. His face was concealed beneath a helm fashioned in the shape of a snarling beast, its horns long and cruel. "One I am High Executioner Sarandiel," the priest said, his voice deep, resonant, carrying the weight of ritual and wrath. "You come seeking answers, reborn." "You know who one I am," Caelir said. "Know what you are," Sarandia replied. "What you carry, what sleeps in your marrow, snarling in dreams, and clawing at your reason." Caelir stepped forward. "Then help me. Tell me why one feel as though every time one draw my sword, one becomes something else. Something darker?" The priest turned and gestured for him to follow. "Then come, let the blood speak." They descended into the temple's heart, a chamber that pulsed with unholy life. The walls were slick with sacrificial residue, and from above, chains hung like vines, each link engraved with a name lost to history. In the center stood a blood cauldron, ancient and alive. It boiled not with heat, but with power. The surface rippled, reflecting not the present, but visions of wars, deaths, screams, vengeance unfulfilled. "This," Sarandiel said, "is the cauldron of judgment. All who seek understanding must look within, not with eyes, but with soul." Caelir hesitated. The blood called to him. He stepped forward, peered into the crimson surface, and the world was torn away. He stood on a battlefield that stretched beyond horizons. Corpses blanketed the earth. Elves, humans, daemons, beasts, he could not count them. Fires raged. The sky wept ash. The wind howled with voices that spoke his name in praise and in horror. At the center stood Aenarion, not as a memory, but alive. Eyes burning, armor cracked. The sword of Cain in his grip, its blade a black flame that screamed with every breath. Aenarion turned. "You came to find the truth," he said. "Then know it." Caelir staggered as visions assaulted him, memories that were not his but were buried in him like roots. The first draw of the blade, the slaughter of daemons by the thousands, the betrayal of Morathi, the love of Asteriel, the death of their children, the roar of dragons, the silence of gods. One killed for them, Aenarion said, voice hollow. Bled for them, burned for them, and in the end, one became what one was fighting. "You let the sword consume you," Caelir whispered. Aenarion nodded. "And you carry the same seed. It blooms each time you kill, each time you let the fire free." The vision cracked like glass. Aelith gasped and fell back from the cauldron, landing hard on the stone. Sarandiel stood over him. "Well," the priest asked, "do you see now? Cain's gift is not madness, it is clarity. In battle there is no lie, only purpose. You were born of fire, bred to end. It is truth, Caelir. Embrace it." Caelir rose slowly, unsteady, and saw what one could become. Sarandiel extended a dagger, its blade shaped like a fang. "Then accept your path. Become the first of the new sons. Lead us as Aenarion led before. The world burns again. Cain waits for your answer." Caelir reached for the blade. His fingers brushed it, and stopped. "No," he said, "Cain offers only fury, but one I am not fury alone." He dropped the dagger. It clattered like thunder in the silence. "One will fight, one will kill, but one will not belong to your god." The witch elves hissed. Some stepped forward, blades poised. But Sarandiel raised his hand. "Let him go," he said, voice unreadable. "He carries Cain's fire whether he bows to it or not. His path is his own, for now." Caelir left the temple alone, blood still singing in his ears. The fire within him was unchanged. But now he knew its name, and knowing it was the first step toward mastering it. Chapter 13. Betrayal in the Shadows. Twilight hung like a gauze veil over the city of Ulthuan, casting the marble towers and opalescent domes in a melancholy hue. The wind off the sea was heavy with salt and the distant cries of gulls, but the harbor, normally bustling with light and laughter, was subdued. The lanterns lining the canals flickered weakly, as though reluctant to resist the deepening dark. The scent of something wrong, like smoldering parchment and cold steel, hung faintly in the air. Caelir returned from his sojourn to the Temple of Cain cloaked in silence. Though no banners heralded his arrival and no horns were sounded, words spread like fire through silk. The people whispered of his journey in the shadows, of his descent into the house of blood. Some spoke with awe, others with unease. Not all of them were high elves. Some of them were Malekith's eyes. The Druki had always relied on subterfuge more than siege, and within Ulthuan's glimmering courts no lie was deadlier than the one wrapped in friendship. The noble estate of House Varathil, nestled within the upper tiers of Ulthuan, had long stood as a symbol of loyalty and prudence. Its lord, Varian Varathil, was a decorated general, a patron of the arts, and one of Caelir's earliest supporters within the High Council. He had spoken passionately for Caelir's inclusion, defended his right to counsel, and even shared wine and war stories in quiet chambers away from prying eyes. Many in the court trusted him. Caelir trusted him. And so, when the invitation came, a simple, hand-penned note sealed with Varian's crest, Caelir answered without guard, accompanied only by 2 attendants. He walked through Varathil's ancestral archways, their columns etched with verses honoring Aenarion, past braziers burning with soft fire, into a courtyard perfumed with twilight blossoms. And there he found betrayal. It was not the dagger that warned him, nor the sound of footsteps. He had fought too long to be caught so easily. It was the silence. Too perfect, too deep. A moment later, the first blade struck. Caelir twisted just in time, the assassin's dagger grazing his ribs instead of piercing his heart. He stumbled back, drawing his sword in one fluid motion as shadows sprang to life around him. Robed figures emerged from every corner of the courtyard, silent, masked, wielding curved blades glistening with greenish venom. Their armor was not elven. It was spined, tight-wound leather, studded with black iron. Druki shades. "Varian!" Caelir shouted, blood already staining his side. "What have you done?" From the far edge of the garden, the Novo stepped forward, not in chains, not as a hostage, but in full ceremonial garb, his blade sheathed, his face composed. "One have done what was necessary," Varian said, his voice devoid of regret. "You are a spark sent to ignite the world in flame. You wear Aenarion's soul like a sword belt, and ask us not to fear you. But one do fear you, Caelir. One fear what you will become. So does my true master." Caelir's heart tightened. "Malekith." Varian inclined his head. "He offers salvation not through fire and prophecy, but through strength, through order. You could have joined him. Instead you walk blindly into damnation. One do this for Ulthuan." "You dishonor her," Caelir growled, sword raised. "You are nothing but a knife in the dark." The assassins closed in. The courtyard became chaos. Caelir fought like a storm, pain lancing his side with every breath. The blood from his wound made his grip slick, but still he moved, sword trailing arcs of light in the deepening dusk. The assassins came at him in coordinated strikes, 3 at a time, 2 from the front, 1 from behind, but he turned their precision into waste. Steel rang. Flesh tore. Shadows burned as he unleashed bursts of raw heat, the fire within him roaring in pain and rage. He felled 5 before the 6th blade struck deep. A dagger slid beneath his pauldron and bit into his shoulder, severing muscle. He dropped to one knee, vision swimming, the taste of copper flooding his mouth. The darkness surged. The fire screamed. He felt Aenarion's presence again, closer than ever. "Take them. End this. Let the beast rise." But something held him back. Not mercy. Not fear. Memory. Alarielle's voice, soft as a breeze across still water. "Fire, you are not fury alone." He gritted his teeth and surged to his feet, the fire burning brighter now, not wild, but focused. He hurled one shade into the garden wall with a pulse of heat, sending molten shards exploding outward. Another he blinded with a gout of smoke and followed with a sweep of steel across her throat. Then he turned to flee, not out of cowardice, but to survive. The remaining assassins pursued, but Caelir was already gone, his movements erratic, blood marking his passage. He crashed through a side gate and into the lower alleys of Ulthuan, leaping across rooftops slick with dew, stumbling through servant courtyards and market squares now deserted in the dark. Shouts rang out, alarms rose in his wake. But none followed. None dared. Because in his passage, the very air began to smolder. He collapsed in a sacred grove near the eastern cliffs, hidden beneath a canopy of moonflowers. The scent of salt and ash mingled as he fell to his knees and screamed, not in pain, but in betrayal. He had trusted Varian, believed in the nobility of his kin, but now he knew the truth. The enemy 999 not only come from the north. They were within the walls, within the courts, within the very blood of Ulthuan. Wounded, exhausted, and hunted, Caelir pressed his palm to the earth, and the ground beneath him seared with a quiet pulse. The fire would not let him die, and neither would vengeance. By morning, the body of Lord Varian Verithil was found burned to ash within his estate, murdered, they said, by a shadow that left no tracks. Caelir was nowhere to be found. Rumors spread. The reborn had vanished. The flame had been extinguished. The traitors had triumphed. But those who had stood upon the northern walls, those who had seen what he was, knew the truth. He had not fallen. He had been betrayed, and the fire would rise again. Chapter 14. March of the Phoenix. It began with a whisper in the wilderness, an ember buried beneath ash, flickering in defiance of the wind. For weeks, the name Caelir had vanished from court lips, replaced by careful phrases and frightened glances. The Council of Lothern spoke of betrayal, of instability, of necessity. Rumors twisted like vines through the spires and gardens. The reborn king had succumbed to madness. He had been consumed by his own fire. He had fled into exile, never to return. But in the far reaches of Cathik, beyond the watchful gaze of the Phoenix Crown, where frost gripped the cliffs and pine woods wept with mist, the truth was carving its own path. Caelir had not died. He had risen. The ruined outpost of Galrath's watch clung to the edge of a windswept plateau, long since abandoned after the first wars with the Druki. Its towers lay broken, its battlements crumbling beneath centuries of rain and salt. But now, fires glowed in its courtyards once more. The sound of hammer on anvil rang out across the stone. Steel was shaped, oaths were sworn, banners sewn by hand, each stitch a symbol of defiance. It was here that Caelir gathered them, the forgotten, the shamed, the wandering blades left behind by peace and politics. They came not for reward, nor even redemption, but for purpose. There were warriors cast out for dueling lords, seers whose visions were too wild for the high tower, archmages stripped of titles for defying council decrees. There were veterans of the Northern War who had seen the fire in Caelir's soul and believed it not a curse but a torch, meant to light the path. And they followed him, the Phoenix host. They bore no sigils of Ulthuan's noble houses, no crests of lineage or ancient bloodlines. Their armor was mismatched, their shields battered, their blades old but sharpened anew. And yet, there was power in them. Not the polished veneer of ceremony, but the raw, unyielding force of belief. At their heart stood Caelir. Though his wounds had scarred, and his cloak was singed by betrayal, he moved with fire in his veins and clarity in his stride. His eyes burned brighter than ever, no longer flickering between past and present, but focused forward, lit by purpose. He stood upon the ramparts as dawn broke, wrapped in a mantle of red and gold. The cereal bloom still clasped at his breastplate, its glow returned, alive once more. Around him the Phoenix host assembled, row after row beneath banners depicting a rising flame across a black sun. Caelir raised his voice, not in fury, but in fire-forged conviction. "They say one have fallen," he called out. "They say one fled, that one was broken by treachery, that the fire is too wild to tame." He stepped forward, every movement casting long shadows through the fog. "But we are not broken, we are not ash, we are not dust to be swept aside. We are the ones they fear, the ones they forgot, and we will show them what rises when the world turns from light." His hand ignited, not with magic, but with raw divine fury, casting his body in radiant gold. "We are fire reborn. We are Phoenix." The warriors roared, voices thundering against the cliffs. Swords were lifted, shields pounded. The mountains answered with echo upon echo, as though the gods themselves bore witness. Over the next days, the Phoenix host marched. They moved not as a ragtag rebellion, but as a disciplined force. Scouts of Aenarion rode ahead, their falcons marking paths through the forests. Former sword masters drilled younger fighters, forging unity in battle forms once forbidden to outsiders. Mages of Sapphire channeled ambient magic into banners, cloaks, and blades, binding the very wind to their cause. And as they moved, others joined them. From the coast of Tiranoc came shipwrights who had abandoned their lords in protest of the council's silence. From the edges of Caelir came dragon priests, ancient and half-mad, claiming the stars had aligned again, that the blood of the first king had awakened. Some came with nothing but belief, others came with steel, all came with fire. They reached the shattered border of northern Yvresse on the third week of their march, where villages still smoldered from the Chaos invasion, where corpses hung from gnarled trees, their skin marked with demonic sigils. The remnants of the local garrison had entrenched themselves in a half-collapsed fort, too weak to retreat, too proud to surrender. Caelir sent no herald. He walked into the fort gates alone. The defenders aimed spears at him, too weary to recognize him. Their captain, face gray with exhaustion, stepped forward. "Turn back," she said. "We've no room for prophecy or rebellion." "1 a.m. not rebellion," Caelir said calmly. "1 a.m. what remains when the old fails. 1. We brought soldiers, supplies, mages." The captain hesitated. "And why would we trust you?" Caelir opened his cloak. There, in the folds of red and gold, burned the brand of Aenarion, seared into his skin, unbidden, during his first passage through the eternal flame. It pulsed softly, visible through the weave of his armor. Her voice caught. "You? It's true." Caelir nodded. "It's begun." She fell to one knee, and her soldiers followed. Within hours, the fort was transformed. Its broken gates reinforced, its dead buried with rites. And upon its highest tower, the Phoenix host raised its first standard, flame against shadow, light in defiance of despair. Far to the south, in the chambers of the Moonstone throne, word reached the council. Caelir had returned. Caelir, but not alone. He marched, not with emissaries or pleas, but with a legion. And now, the nobility of Ulthuan faced a question older than any crown. Would they kneel beside the flame or be consumed by it? Chapter 15. Siege of the White Tower. The winds screamed across the plains of Sapphire, clawing at the earth like the ragged breath of gods at war. In the distance, the White Tower of Hoeth, a monolith of knowledge and magic, the sacred seat of wisdom in all Ulthuan, stood defiant, its impossibly high spire piercing the storm-racked sky like a spear of moonlight thrust into a churning void. But even stone, forged with the blessings of the gods, could shudder under siege. And the storm that now surrounded Hoeth was not of natural origin. Above the tower, the skies split with unnatural lightning, arcs of crimson and violet tearing through the air, while the ground below seethed with warp taint. From rent portals in the fabric of reality, demons of every form spilled forth, warped horrors born of nightmare and madness. Some floated on wings of skin and shadow, others galloped on limbs too numerous to count, their screams echoing with the chorus of 1,000 damned tongues. They came not for conquest, they came for destruction, for knowledge erased, for history unmade, for the silencing of the High Lore Master himself. Within the tower's lower rings, the defenders held, but barely. Archmages cast barrier after barrier, layers of shimmering wards crackling with ancient glyphs, while initiates collapsed from magical exhaustion. The once pristine white stone of the tower ran red with blood and ichor. Books burned in the libraries. Scrolls turned to ash. 1499 incantation. And at the center of the tower, deep in the Hall of Silence, Teclis himself fought like a dying star. The High Lore Master had shed all semblance of courtly restraint. Gone were his flowing robes and staff of state. He stood in a circle of runes drawn in his own blood, hurling pure bolts of etheric force at the seething mass of daemons clawing through the arcane defenses. His face was gaunt, eyes aflame with runic light, his voice reduced to hoarse shouts as each spell pulled more from his soul. He would die here, unless he came. The skies above Sathari thundered with sudden fury. A second storm was forming, this one born not of chaos, but of fire. From the north, across the charred fields of Vivresse and the snow-wrapped spine of the Anulii, came a host that marched not with fanfare or ceremony, but with grim, unyielding purpose. Their armor bore no noble sigils, only the rising flame of a new dawn. Their leader rode at the head, his cloak torn by wind, his sword wrapped in cloth to hide its light. Caelir. The Phoenix host had come, and so had judgment. The tower's outer perimeter was already breached by the time Caelir arrived. Daemons swarmed the lower levels like ants over a corpse, clawing at wards, dragging screaming mages into shadow. The very air shimmered with unreality, buildings flickering in and out of phase as reality bent beneath the weight of the warp. Caelir 999, not wait. He charged into the fray with the full fury of the phoenix. His blade, unsheathed, howled as it met the flesh of horrors born from the minds of mad gods. Each strike sent fire cascading across the ground, turning even the demon's warflesh to ash. His warriors followed, disciplined and lethal, archers loosing runed arrows that burned mid-air, swordmasters moving like water through flame. Yet for all their fury, it was not enough. The demons kept coming. The tower screamed. Within the central spire, Teclis faltered. A demon prince of Tzinch, cloaked in writhing feathers and crowned with impossible geometry, breached the final ward. Its voice was a symphony of truths that should not be known, its talons dripping with untime. "You have studied long," it hissed. "Now be unmade." Teclis raised his staff one final time, and a thunderclap rocked the chamber. Flame exploded through the walls. The demon prince turned just in time to see Caelir crash through the upper vaults, fire trailing from his form like a comet made flesh. His armor had melted in places, revealing runes beneath the skin, glowing with divine fury. His eyes blazed gold, his sword struck with the sound of gods dying. The demon shrieked as Caelir's blade tore through its unnatural heart, ripping its essence from the material plane. It exploded in a burst of violet flame and psychic feedback, throwing Caelir across the chamber. Teclis dropped to one knee. Blood streamed from his eyes, but he smiled. "You came." Caelir rose, breathing hard. "One swore one would not let Ulthuan fall." But even as the demon fell, the breach remained. More surged toward them, impossible shapes, wings of mirror glass and mouths that wept fire. The tower groaned, the wards shattered one by one, and Caelir felt the flame within him begging to be released. Aenarion's soul rose like a tide behind his thoughts, urging, pushing, whispering, "Let go. Unleash." Teclis looked at him, reading his soul. "No," the Lawmaster said, "you cannot control what you're about to do." "One don't have a choice," Caelir replied. "You always do." Caelir turned, faced the rising tide of demons, and opened the gate. Fire consumed him. Not mortal fire, not magic. Something older. The tower shook as a pillar of white flame burst from its center, reaching into the heavens. Every window shattered, every ward ignited. From Caelir's outstretched hands poured a torrent of divine wrath, fire that 999 not burn flesh, but essence. It tore the demons from existence, not by force, but by denial. The very world rejected them. The daemons screamed, unraveling in mid-charge. Their shapes split, folded, vanished into the void. The rift above the tower quivered, cracked, and finally imploded in a thunderous boom that sent shock waves across Sapphire. And then, silence. The fire died. Caelir fell. He awoke hours later, beneath the cracked dome of the central spire. Teclis knelt beside him, drained but alive. "The tower stands," Caelir whispered. "For now," Teclis said. "But so does your enemy. They know now what you are." Caelir looked to his hands. They were blackened, not from burns, but from the mark of something greater, something neither wholly divine nor wholly damned. 999 one. "Lose myself?" he asked. Teclis paused. "No, but you walk close enough to feel the edge." Outside, the Phoenix host stood in silence among the ashes, watching their leader emerge from fire, wounded but unbroken. And far away, in the towers of Naggarond, Malekith stared into the flames and smiled. "The blade is not drawn," he said, "but it is burning." The White Tower had been saved, but the fire had tasted freedom, and it would never forget. Chapter 16. A Blade in the Flame. The sea thrashed with fury, black waves crowned in foam crashing against the ragged cliffs of the blighted isle. The sky churned with thunder and madness, clouds split with veins of lightning that burned purple and red, bleeding light into a world that had long forgotten warmth. Wind tore at the sails of Caelir's ship, as if trying to rip it from time itself. It was no ordinary storm. It was a summoning. The sea, the sky, even the land knew what was coming, and it screamed. Caelir stood at the bow of the ship, cloaked in silence and the mantle of destiny. His eyes were hollow with exhaustion, shoulders heavy with grief. He bore the scars of betrayal, of battle, of prophecy's weight, but more than that, he bore a choice. And now that choice was at its end. The Sword of Cain called, and he had answered. Behind him stood no host. No banners fluttered, no horns sounded. He had left the Phoenix host behind, left even Teclis and Aenarion, whose pleas echoed in his mind like fading music. He had not told them of this journey. He had told no one, because some decisions were made in fire and silence, and because Caelir no longer knew who he would be when the sun next rose. He disembarked alone, boots sinking into the ash-stained sands of the isle's haunted shore. The same dark, lifeless trees clawed at the sky. The same cursed air coiled around his skin like oil. The same silence pressed against his thoughts, louder than any war cry. But this time, something was different. The land itself trembled. He walked the path again, the trail he had once followed with fear, now retraced with cold finality. The shattered statues of kings long dead loomed over him like judges carved from gilt and stone. Some were faceless. Some wept. One, Aenarion's, was split down the middle, cracked and scorched, as if it could no longer bear its own memory. Caelir passed them without pause. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the world itself sought to hold him back. Whispers crawled across his mind, promises, accusations, screams from lives unlived. You are not strong enough. You are all that remains. You are his mirror. You are his mistake. The wind howled in agreement, and then the altar rose before him. The altar of Caelir, where gods had once dared not tread, stood untouched by time. It was carved from obsidian and bone, streaked with dried blood that never faded. Around it, the pillars cracked and groaned as thunder bled into the sky. At its heart, impaled in dark stone, stood the sword of Cain, the Widowmaker, Godslayer. The blade was long and cruel, forged not by hands but by fate itself. Runes pulsed along its edge, marks not of language but of truth. It shimmered like a shard of night, veins of red light pulsing from its core like the heartbeat of a dying god. And it called to him, not with words, but with memory. Caelir approached. He fell to his knees before the altar, breathing hard. Rain pelted his face, soaking his cloak. Lightning flashed across the sky, and for a moment he was not Caelir. He was Aenarion. He saw her again. Astariel, radiant and weeping. He heard the cries of his children, the roar of dragons, the silence of the flame. He remembered the first draw, the first scream, the moment when fate became war. He remembered the price, and still his hand rose. The moment his fingers brushed the hilt, the ground shook. Not a tremor, but a rejection. The eye howled. The sky ripped open. Lightning struck the altar, exploding in arcs of warp fire that tore through the sky like blood vessels. The sea rose in walls of water. The trees wailed as if alive. Across Ulthuan, those attuned to the Aether gasped. Mages fell to their knees, temples cracked, and seers went blind with visions. Caelir gripped the hilt. The blade was cold, then fire. In everything, it screamed into his soul, and he screamed back. He pulled. The sword came free with a sound like the end of time. The flame within him burst outward, not a fire of warmth, but of judgment. His armor split, glowing from within like molten iron. His skin shone with runes of the old tongue. His hair whipped in the storm wind, eyes lit like twin stars. Above, the sky split open, raining blood and starlight. Every creature on the blighted isle fell to the ground, beast, demon, spirit trembling. In the heavens, Azarion's flame dimmed. In Nagaroth, Malekith staggered as if struck, his voice trembling. It has begun. Caelir stood at the altar, the sword of Cain in hand. His breath came in searing bursts, his face carved by pain and power alike. His voice was a whisper that roared like thunder. No more lies, no more chains. One Aeon, not Aenarion. He lifted the blade to the sky. One Aeon what comes after, and the sky screamed. Chapter 17. King of Ash and War. The full moon hung over Lothern's harbors like an unblinking eye, its silver light rippling across water dark with oil and stars. In the great hall of the Sunspire, where banners of past Phoenix kings hung like silent witnesses, the air crackled with an urgency beyond ceremony. Tonight, fire would be made into a crown. Caelir stood on the dais before the Phoenix throne, though the seat remained empty. His cloak of scarlet and gold fluttered in the draught, the brand of Aenarion faintly glowing upon his chest where his armor was torn. The cereal bloom still pulsed, though its glow had grown hard and blue, like a shard of ice locked in flame. Around him he saw faces turned, some bowed with hope, others tilted in dread, many masked in ambition or fear. Behind him marched the new Phoenix host, warriors of every realm and every shame, now lifted to purpose. Their mismatched armor gleamed in torchlight, swords raised. They were the resurrected and the reborn. Across the chamber, clad in golden lion mail and blue mantle, stood Tyrion, his helm off, long hair silvering, his eyes firm and unforgiving. At his side, Teclis wore robes of moonsilver, hood half drawn, his staff dark with runes, that had tasted too much sorrow. The hall hushed as Caelir raised his voice. "One come not as the heir of a throne," he declared, the words echoing off stone walls, "nor as the shadow of a legend. One come as one who has walked through fire, across exile, through betrayal, and emerged not unscathed but alive." A ripple ran through the assembled nobles. Tyrion took a step forward. His voice was quiet, but carried like steel on wind. "By what right do you stand upon this dais? The phoenix crown is not earned by sword alone." He pointed to Caelir's breastplate. "By what right do you draw upon power you scarcely command? The flames may have borne you, but they will not bind you, not unless you bind them yourself." A murmur rose. Teclis lifted a hand. "The war is come, the hour ripe. Ulthuan demands a leader, yet one who holds that flame in balance, not one who becomes consumed by it. Caelir, the power you bear is not yours alone, it is our people's. If you wear the crown, you must claim it for all, not for vengeance." Caelir's amber eyes flicked between them, between hope and condemnation. His hand drifted to the cereal bloom beneath his armor. "Exarch, you claim one wield the power for vengeance," he said, "and you claim that one would be consumed. But tell me this. When the darkness came, when the gates of Lothran cracked and the north screamed with war, where were you? Where was the hope? One stood in the storm, one bore the fire." His voice cracked and rose. "Now the crown demands not someone to wear it, but something. The old paths are broken, new ones must be forged. This throne must become the anvil upon which Ulthuan's renewal is hammered." Silence followed. Torch flames flickered as though anticipating the answer. Tyrion's fists clenched. "Then you force the throne without consent. We are not your host, we are your people, and people cannot be forged by fire alone." A cry echoed from the balcony. "The sword!" Heads turned. The Phoenix Guard appeared at the doors, silent as statues. They carried the Phoenix crown, a circlet of twin phoenixes, wrought of star metal, flame-etched. It was placed on the dais. Caelir approached, his steps measured. Every eye followed him. He reached out and took the crown. As his fingers closed on the metal, the torches dimmed. Magic hummed. The air thickened. The crown touched his brow. The moment the circlet settled, the flame within him surged outward in a golden wave. The hall lit bright as day, the shadows fleeing. The cereal bloom pulsed violently, then stilled. He rose, crowned. The banner behind him unfurled on its own accord, a phoenix reborn, a flame rising from ash. The nobles gasped. Tyrion looked on, face stricken with quiet anguish. Teclis bowed his head, sorrow etched deep. He whispered only one word, "Go." And Caelir strode forward, raising his sword high. "To the dawn of Ulthuan," he said, "to the fire that refuses to die." A blast of magic thundered from the throne. The Phoenix hosts raised their weapons and let their war cry roll across the hall. But as the echoes died, Tyrion confronted him, clad in the swordmaster's white and gold, hand resting on hilt. "If you rule as warlord, you will lead us into ruin. If you rule as monarch, you must be more than flame. Prove you are worthy, Caelir. Prove you are just." Caelir paused. If the hall had contained air, the moment might have cracked it. "One will," he said softly, "and one will prove it with fire." Tyrion nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing, though his eyes held the stain of fear for what might come. Below the dais, Teclis watched. The grief in his eyes was like the fading of stars. He had seen eras end. He had watched friends and foes burn in magic and war. He had felt the cost. And now, he feared the price would be paid again. Outside, the wind howled over the sea, and Ulthuan's towers glowed in moonlit fire. The Phoenix King was crowned. Ash and war waited, and Ulthuan held its breath. Chapter 18. The Final Confrontation. Night had fallen across the northern wilds of Ulthuan like a blade drawn from unseen hands. The air was thick with frost and foreboding. The peaks of the Anuli Mountains glowed faintly with reflected fire, as if doomed lanterns cast from the gates of Lothern. At the northernmost passes, the dark legions of the Witch King had broken through. Lightning-riven barges of black iron breached the sea walls. Warped drake riders swept the ridges, and demonic beasts trampled the frozen forest beneath hooves like thunder. On a plateau scarred by ancient war, the storm gathered its voice. Above the thrust of steel and the cry of war, the sky itself quaked. And there stood the two of them, the Witch King, Malekith, son of Aenarion and heir to bitterness. His armor, black as nightmare, etched with runes of hate. His helm crowned with iron horns, his eyes aflame with a vengeance centuries old. WarhammerFantasyFandom.com. +1. And the man who bore the soul of the Phoenix King reborn. Caelir, armored in scarlet and gold. The brand of Aenarion burned upon his chest. The cereal bloom glowing faintly beneath his breast. A king not yet crowned, but destiny made. Between them lay a sea of broken shields and fallen standards, the ground slick with the blood of high elf and dark elf both. The wind moaned like a chorus of grieving ghosts. Malekith's voice cut through the thunder. You claim the name, you claim the flame, but you walk the shadow of a ruin. Aenarion died by fire. He left only ash. One will leave something deeper beneath your legacy. Caelir answered, voice steady but deep with sorrow. One walk not Aenarion's shadow. One walk the path made in his wake. You talk of ruin, but you have already built your throne upon it. With a roar like the death of worlds, Malekith raised his great black blade, the destroyer manifested, and the ground trembled. You would stand in my way. One I am your father, in blood and blame. One have waited centuries for this. Caelir's eyes flicked with regret, with something burning behind the amber glow. You are not my father, not by choice, not by promise. One was born in flame, not betrayal. And so the battle began. Malekith surged forward, his blade cleaving the air with a hiss of malevolence. Caelir met the strike with his own sword, steel singing, sparks flying into the storm-lit night. The clash echoed across the pass, and for a moment the storm behind them paused, as if waiting. Malekith's laughter was cold. You still hesitate. The fire you carry recoils from me. One hesitate because one remember, Caelir said, his blade turning a dark figure's skull to mist. Remember what the flame cost. They moved like gods. Malekith's blade struck with the weight of grudges, each blow aimed at more than flesh. Caelir responded with the brilliance of redemption, each parry a promise, each thrust a question. Will you be what was doomed, or what might rise? Around them the dark elf host surged, yet none dared intervene. This duel was beyond common war. This was soul against soul. Malekith feinted left, then unleashed a torrent of warp fire that scorched the snow and boiled the air. Caelir raised his sword and answered with a flare of Azorian's will, a shield of golden flame that flared outward, offering the host a lifeline of hope. Malekith sneered. The gods abandoned you. Caelir's reply was barely a whisper. Perhaps. But one I am not abandoned. With that, he advanced, every step deliberate, carrying the weight of the Phoenix host behind him. Malekith answered by driving Caelir back through the shattered line of battle, past fallen banners and broken oaths. They fought atop a ridge where the sea of clouds below roared like a torrent. Lightning danced overhead, illuminating their forms in strobing light. Malekith's black, serrated silhouette against Caelir's radiant blade. Malekith tripped a rune beneath his boot and raised a spell. Dragons of midnight formed in the air, screaming into existence. Caelir's defiance answered. He sprang upward on the wind-charged air, his sword cleaving the lead dragon's skull, golden fire burning its dreams away. Others faltered and collapsed at his feet. Malekith roared in rage. "One gave everything for this throne. You were given, yet demand." "Demanded nothing," Caelir said, voice echoing. "One earned pain. One earned fire. One earned the right to decide." The Witch King's armor finally cracked under a blow that shivered time. With a final blow, Caelir disarmed him, black blade sliding from Malekith's grip. Then Caelir's sword pressed at Malekith's throat. Below them, the armies watched. Malekith looked up, grin twisted. "Kill me, take the crown. But know this, you cannot kill fate." Caelir's eyes softened with sorrow. "War doesn't crown men, choice crowns them." And then the sword dropped. Malekith staggered to his knees, the host silent. "You spared me," he croaked. "Yes," Caelir said. The sword glowed in his hand. "Because one don't want your reign of ruin. One want Ulthuan's dawn." Malekith looked beyond him at the ravaged pass, the bodies, the fire, the cost. Rage died, and something older returned. Regret. Caelir turned, raising the blade high so that the last lightning bolt split the sky, and the ridge trembled. "Phoenix," he declared, "not king of ash, but king of flame reborn." Behind him, the dark host broke. Men and elves alike dropped their weapons. The Witch King's army fled, leaderless. Malekith remained on his knees, twilight around him. Teclis arrived then, robes torn, staff cracked, but eyes clear. He placed a hand on Caelir's shoulder. "I show. Everyone is here. Our purpose is clear. You made your choice. May the gods grant that you hold true." Tyrion came next, sword sheathed, his expression a 1009 of relief and fear. "You fought not just him, but us too. Your flame could burn everything." Caelir nodded. "Then one will guard it." Malekith looked up one last time. "You are not Aenarion." "No," Caelir replied, stepping away. "One am more." The sky broke into dawn, and Ulthuan breathed again. Chapter 19. The Price of Power. The dawn that rose over Ulthuan that morning was not golden. It was red. Not the warm crimson of a hopeful sunrise, but the raw, blistered hue of open wounds and scorched skies. The sun's rays filtered through clouds blackened by fire and ash, casting long shadows across the once pristine lands of the elves. Forests lay in ruin, rivers ran choked with silt and the stink of burning corpses. Cities still smoked in the distance, some reduced to rubble, others now ghostly remains where no voice rose in song or lament. Victory had come, but it had not come gently. Caelir stood alone upon the ramparts of Tor Ivres, the great citadel reclaimed only days before. The banners of both the Phoenix host and the old Ulthuan realms fluttered beside him, but they felt weightless, like remnants of a world that had slipped away while no one was watching. His sword rested in the stone beside him, plunged deep enough to crack the foundation. It pulsed softly, still warm, still whispering. His armor, once gleaming with gold and fire, was scorched and cracked, streaked with blood and soot. The Caelir bloom on his chest had withered into a blackened husk, its light extinguished. Below him, the fields of war stretched to the horizon. Bodies lay in layers, dark elves and high elves, chaos beasts and mortal men, indistinguishable in death. Fires still smoldered in the hollows. The air was thick with cinders and the faint metallic scent of blood. And silence. The silence was the worst. They had won. Malekith's armies were broken, his black ark shattered upon the reefs of Lothern. The Druchii had fled, scattered into the sea and into the shadows. The corruption of chaos, which had spread like a cancer across the northern reaches, was purged by fire and magic. The portals had been sealed. The warprints burned closed by Teclis in the circle of flame at great cost. But it had come with a toll no soul could truly bear. In the final battle, whole provinces had been lost to collateral devastation. Cathik was half submerged beneath tidal fire. Ivresi's woods, once thick with memory and moonlight, were now lifeless ash. The city of Safari, jewel of mages, still stood, but the white tower had cracked near its peak, and hundreds of loremaster apprentices were entombed beneath its broken libraries. And then there was Caelir himself. He had not drawn the sword of Cain again, not fully, but the power he had unleashed on the Blighted Isle had not faded. It had followed him. In the heat of the war's climax, it surged again when the line broke, when the phoenix host faltered, when the chaos worm tore open the skies. He had called upon it, and it had answered. In that moment, he had become a being of flame and wrath, not mortal, not God, something between. He had scorched half a valley, turned daemons to dust with a glance, annihilated a war host of thousands in a single act of will. But in doing so, he had changed. Even now he could feel it. The fire behind his eyes, that 999, not 1499. The whispering beneath the silence. The way the ground sometimes trembled when he passed. He had won, but the cost had been himself. A soft sound behind him broke his thoughts. It was Teclis, wrapped in gray and gold robes, his face ashen with exhaustion. The loremaster moved with a limp now, leaning on his staff scorched at the tip. "There's still no singing in the gardens," Teclis said quietly. "Even the trees seem afraid to bloom." Caelir didn't turn. "Perhaps they should be." Teclis sighed. "You are not a tyrant, Caelir. You chose not to become what Aenarion became. You cast the sword aside when it mattered." "And yet one still feel it," Caelir whispered. "Even now. It burns me, not in my flesh, but in my choices. One saved this land, but one wonder. 999. One scorched too much of it in the doing." Teclis moved beside him, staring out across the battlefield. "Ulthuan has always bled for its salvation, but we never asked what salvation truly meant." Caelir looked down at his gauntleted hands, once steady, now trembling. "One don't know if one can lead them," he admitted. "Not now. Not like this." Teclis nodded solemnly. "That is your next trial. Not to fight, but to heal. And healing is slower than any war." Later that day, in the court of the sundered Phoenix Palace, Caelir stood before the assembled survivors, lords and ladies, warriors and priests, common folk and mages. His crown was not gold, nor iron. It was circled flame, tethered by will, forged by sacrifice. "One cannot promise peace," he said, voice weary but strong. "One cannot promise a return to the days we once knew. Too much has changed. Too much has burned." He looked out over them, eyes shadowed. "But one can promise this. No more kings made by fire. No more gods crowned in blood. We are elves. We are broken, but we will rise, not as we were, but as we must become. No cheers followed, no fanfare, only silence. And in that silence, something new took root. Not hope, perhaps, but understanding. That night, Caelir walked alone through the ruined halls of the Phoenix Court. The fires burned low. The stars blinked behind smoke. He stopped before a mirror, cracked but whole enough to reflect him, and he barely recognized what stared back. Not a king, not a god, not even a warrior. Just a man who had held a world together long enough for dawn to break, and a man who would never stop paying the price. Chapter 20. Ashes of a God. The sky above the blighted isle was gray with mourning. No lightning split the clouds this time. No screams rode the wind. The storm had passed, and in its place came silence. Not peace, but something colder, something final. Waves broke against the obsidian shore with soft, weary rhythm, as though the sea itself had grown tired of blood and fire. The land, long twisted by gods and war, lay dormant beneath veils of fog. The scent of ash lingered still, age-olded, clinging to the stone like sorrow. Caelir stood alone at the edge of the altar. No host followed him now. No banners marked his passage. The phoenix crown had been left behind in Lothern, placed not on a throne but upon an unlit brazier. A symbol not of rule, but remembrance. He carried only one thing, the sword of Cain. Wrapped in strips of cloth soaked in seawater and bound by chains of moonsilver, it hissed faintly with each step he took, as if resentful of restraint. The power within it had gone quiet since the war's end, but Caelir could still feel it pulsing, like the heartbeat of a slain god trapped beneath his skin. He ascended the altar slowly, each step echoing louder than it should. The stones, stained with the blood of kings, warmed beneath his feet, not from sun but from memory. As he climbed, ghosts gathered, not seen, not heard, but felt. Aenarion, Marathi, Aleth Einar, names carved into the bones of this cursed island. They had all come here, to choose, to fall. At the summit, the cradle of the sword stood once more, a jagged wound in the earth, edged with black runes, deeper than it looked, as if it pierced time as well as stone. Caelir unwrapped the sword. Its metal glistened, neither red nor black, but a color that defied words. The runes upon it pulsed, faint but eternal, like the heartbeat of some buried titan. When he touched the hilt, pain flooded him, not of body but of soul. He saw every moment he had drawn its power, the burning valley, the daemons undone, the terrified faces of both foe and ally. He saw Tyrion's eyes before the duel, Teclis's sorrow, the world he had saved, scorched at the edges. He heard Aenarion's voice, not words but grief, deep and vast, carried on centuries of regret. "You have carried me long enough," Caelir whispered, and he plunged the blade home. Always shook. Not violently, no thunder, no explosion, but a deep, resonating quake that ran through the isle like a sigh. The sword of Cain vanished into the altar without resistance. As it sank, flames briefly erupted from the stone, white, gold, then blue, before extinguishing into smoke. And then came stillness. Not absence, but peace. The curse was quieted. Not broken, never broken, but put to sleep once more. Caelir stood there for a long time, staring at the place where the sword had vanished. The wind tugged at his cloak. His armor gleamed faintly in the gloom. The light in his eyes, the fire he had carried that had once threatened to consume him, was 1499 now, not dead, ill transformed. He turned and walked down the altar, past the ruined statues, past the weeping trees, past the ghosts, down to the black sand. The tide had risen. Waves now reached his boots. E-999 not turned to look back. Not at the Phoenix host he had left behind. Not at the kingdom he had restored. Not at the crown he had refused. His path was forward. Not into battle. Not into fire. But into the sea. He stepped into the surf. The water reached his knees, then his chest. He walked as if pulled, not unwilling, but unafraid. And when it reached his chin, he paused. The wind stilled. The world held its breath. And Caelir, the man who had once been fire, who had borne the soul of the first king and the weight of the last war, vanished beneath the waves. No splash, no scream, just a ripple. On the shore the tide receded, and the altar stood, bare once more. In Lothern, a child was born that night beneath strange stars, eyes flickering like flame. In Sapphire the white tower hummed softly, its cracks whispering with light. In Nagaroth, the black mirror of prophecy shattered in silence. And the phoenix crown waited, unworn, but never forgotten. The world turned. The cycle began again. And somewhere deep beneath the waves, in a place where gods no longer reached, the fire of a man once named Caelir glowed faintly in the dark. Not a god. Not a king. But a memory. And memories like fire are never truly extinguished.